Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Tonya McKinley. Tonya McKinley was born on January 25, 1961, in the small town of Milton, Florida. She grew up in a loving family and was very close to her older sister. After graduating from high school, Tonya decided to move to Pensacola, a town about 25 miles away from her hometown. She pursued a career in the medical field. Tonya moved to a new city with her cousin Vanita, and they shared an apartment. After moving in, Tonya met a man named James, and they began dating. They eventually moved in together and had a son, Timothy, in 1983. Although Tonya was happy to be a mother, her relationship with James was troubled. They argued frequently, and about a year after their son was born, they decided to go their separate ways. By the end of 1984, Tonya was temporarily living with Vanita, who was now married with 2 children. Tonya planned to find her own place as soon as possible. On New Year's Eve, Tonya, Vanita, and her husband decided to celebrate at a local bar. They left their children at a late-night daycare. Around midnight, Vanita and her husband were getting ready to leave, but Tonya wanted to stay a little longer. Since the daycare closed at 1 a.m., Vanita agreed to pick up Tonya's son, allowing Tonya to stay at the bar. Before leaving, Vanita asked Tonya how she planned to get home, since they had driven there together. Tonya replied that she would get a ride from their acquaintance at the bar. However, when Vanita woke up on January 1st, she found that Tonya had not yet returned home. At first, Vanita thought Tonya might have slept over with a friend, so she was not too worried. Then, Vanita's mother-in-law arrived with heartbreaking news. Tonya had been found dead around 3 a.m. A Pensacola resident was on her way to the vet with her daughter. While driving, her daughter pointed out a person on the side of the road. Pensacola thought it might be a mannequin, but when she got out to check, she discovered it was a human body. Pensacola immediately returned home and called the police. Upon arriving at the scene, officers found the body of a woman lying in an empty lot beside the road. She had no shoes, her tights were down, and her dress was pulled up. Near the body, a blue towel with what appeared to be bloodstains was found. The police identified the victim as 23-year-old Tonya McKinley. Further investigation led them to discover her shoes and purse nearby, containing identification with her name on it. The body was turned over to medical experts for further examination. Meanwhile, police continued to process the crime scene. They soon discovered that Tonya likely did not die where she was found. There was no significant blood near the body, except for a stain on a towel, and signs on the ground suggested that the body had been dragged to the side of the road. On the towel and Tonya's body, investigators found several clues, including dog hair and a human hair. They suspected that the hair belonged to the killer, and that the killer may have owned a dog. Medical experts determined that the Tonya had suffered a head injury from a heavy object, but her cause of death was actually strangulation. They also confirmed that the Tonya had been sexually assaulted. A semen sample was collected from her body, but at the time, DNA analysis was not yet widely used in forensic science. However, the experts were able to establish that the suspect had type B blood. Police began to develop a list of potential suspects. Police turned their attention to Tonya's ex-husband, James. After talking to Tonya's family and friends, police discovered that James and Tonya had argued frequently before and after the birth of their son. When Tonya decided to end the relationship, James was unhappy and tried to convince her to stay. Police believe that James followed Tonya to the bar on New Year's Eve, leading to a confrontation that ended in murder. They brought James in for questioning, but he denied any involvement in the crime. He also agreed to provide hair samples for comparison. Although experts were unable to extract DNA from the samples, they were able to compare the hairs under a microscope. The results showed that James' hair was significantly different from the hair found on Tonya's body and the towel. As a result, the police temporarily ruled him out as a suspect. Police focused on everyone who was at the bar on New Year's Eve. They asked Vanita if she had noticed anyone acting strangely or aggressively toward Tonya, but she said the evening had gone off without incident. Police also discovered that after Tonya split from her ex-husband, she had started dating a man named Kurt, who was a bartender at the bar where she spent New Year's Eve. Kurt was working the night of the murder. When questioned, Kurt denied any involvement in the crime, claiming he had gone to a New Year's party with friends after his shift. The police reviewed all the testimony and concluded that Kurt had enough time to commit the crime. Based on numerous interviews with people at the bar, the police determined that Tonya was last seen alive at 1:15 a.m., but no one saw her leave. The police also spoke with local residents where the body was discovered. A family reported driving past the scene at around 2 a.m. and were certain that there was no body at that time. This meant that Tonya was killed about 1.5 hours after she was last seen alive. During this time, Kurt was unable to provide an alibi. He volunteered to take a lie detector test, but the results were inconclusive, and further investigation revealed that Kurt's blood type did not match the killer's blood type, as determined by a semen sample. As a result, Kurt was cleared of the crime. Unable to analyze DNA from the killer's semen, and with no witnesses or concrete evidence, police could only assume that the perpetrator likely lived in the area where the body was discovered. The case had been closed for years due to lack of concrete evidence. Timothy, who was only 18 months old when his mother died, was raised by his father and Tonya's family. Together, they kept the truth about his mother's death a secret. When Timothy was 14 years old, he was informed that his mother had died in a car accident. As Christmas approached that year, out of curiosity, he searched his father's closet for his present, and Timothy stumbled upon a shocking letter addressed to television host Montel Williams, written by his father himself. In a letter, Timothy's father wrote asking for help in solving the murder of Timothy's mother, Tonya. The letter included a detailed account of the crime, which was the first time Timothy learned of his mother's tragic fate. Years later, in the early 2000s, police reopened Tonya's case, hoping that advances in DNA technology might help identify the killer. Police sent all available evidence to a lab for analysis. Experts discovered that the blood on a blue towel near Tonya's body came from a man, not Tonya. They created a DNA profile of the unidentified man and uploaded it to the FBI database. But there were no matches. The case was put on hold until 2015, when it was reopened, 30 years after the murder. Through investigation, the police discovered from the FBI's archived database that a person had some similarities with the DNA found at Tonya's crime scene. However, the match was not strong. To investigate further, the police learned about the person's family background and even contacted his relatives for assistance. These relatives cooperated and provided DNA samples for comparison. Unfortunately, the DNA analysis showed that his family was not involved in Tonya's death, leaving the police with no new leads. In 2018, a journalist named Tony Adam became interested in Tonya's case. Tony contacted the police offering help, and the police became suspicious of his involvement. Tony joined the investigation despite having no background in criminal investigations. The police, who had made little progress in the case, hoped that Tony's involvement wouldn't hinder the investigation. In 2019, a year after Tony got involved, police decided to identify the killer's relatives. This time, they enlisted the help of Parabon, a genetic genealogy company, and expanded the search to include primarily the DNA of known criminals. Parabon expanded its search to public genetic databases, which were much larger in scope. Unlike DNA evidence collected from a crime scene, these databases contain DNA samples that people have voluntarily uploaded to find relatives. To find the killer, experts used a process of elimination, carefully analyzing the family trees of potential relatives to identify someone who matched their suspect's criteria. They were looking for a man who was at least old enough to have committed the crime in 1985 and had a connection to the area where the crime was committed. In 2020, police identified a suspect in Tonya's murder. Daniel Wells, 57, had been arrested in the late 1980s for assault and indecent exposure. At the time, he was living in Pensacola, working as a carpenter and living with his wife and children. But to confirm whether Daniel was actually the killer, detectives needed to compare his DNA to the profile they collected from the crime scene. To prevent Daniel from fleeing, the police approached cautiously. They kept watch, waiting for an opportunity to collect a DNA sample from him without arousing Daniel's suspicion. Daniel threw a cigarette butt out of the car window near his workplace. The police collected the cigarette butt and immediately sent it to the lab for analysis. Experts extracted DNA from the saliva on the filter and compared it to the DNA of the killer in the Tonya case. The results were a match. The police eventually identified Daniel as the culprit and arrested him the same day. Despite the DNA test results, the police still tried to get Daniel to confess. They arranged for a patrol officer to stop Daniel's car under the pretext of doing a routine ID check. Detectives then approached Daniel, informing him that he needed to accompany them to the station without providing any further explanation. By withholding information, they intentionally kept Daniel in suspense, allowing them to proceed with the investigation cautiously. The police approached Daniel, informing him that he needed to come with them to the police station without further explanation. During the investigation, the detectives slowly steered the conversation toward Tonya's murder, asking Daniel about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. At first, he claimed to have never seen Tonya. However, when the detectives revealed that his DNA was found at the crime scene, his story began to unfold. As the questioning continued, Daniel's denials became increasingly unconvincing, and he grew more and more agitated. Detectives made it clear that the DNA evidence was irrefutable and that he would face consequences for his actions. As the interrogation continued, Daniel denied his guilt and became increasingly agitated. The police said the DNA evidence was incontrovertible and he would face the consequences for his actions. Faced with the evidence, Daniel finally broke down and began to speak. He and Tonya went to his house, where they had sex after drinking. However, an argument broke out, the argument escalated, and in a fit of rage, Daniel picked up a heavy wooden cutting board and hit Tonya over the head. When he realized she was dead, Daniel panicked and dumped her body in a location where it was later discovered. On his way back, Daniel discarded the Tonya's belongings and returned home. When questioned about the dog hairs found on the Tonya's clothes and towel, he attributed them to his roommate's black Labrador. Contrary to Daniel's claim that Tonya died from a head injury, the medical evidence clearly showed that the cause of death was strangulation. In a possible chain of events, Daniel struck Tonya in the head, but when he realized she was still alive, he resorted to strangling her. The police gathered enough evidence to arrest him for murder. Police then contacted Tonya's family, including her son Timothy, to inform them of the developments in the case. Timothy was deeply moved, thanking the police for finally identifying his mother's killer. 2 weeks after his arrest, Daniel's body was found in his cell. An investigation confirmed that he had committed suicide. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Vera Pekteleva. Vera Pekteleva was born on September 24, 1997 in Kelos, Kovo Oblast. As she grew up, she became a cheerful and creative individual. With a passion for singing, she secured first place in various school competitions. Although her parents, Oksana and Yvonne, Divorced during her school years, they remained on good terms. Vera maintained a positive relationship with both her father's new wife and her mother's new husband. Those who knew her described Vera as a kind, optimistic, and non-confrontational person. As mentioned earlier, Vera was a creative individual, and her family was taken aback when, after completing high school, she opted to move to Kovo and pursue a technical education at the state university, rather than following a more artistic route. Her mother, Oksana, resided in Kisilov, which was approximately 110 miles away from Kovo, and Vera would visit her during her spare time. During one of her visits in 2016, Vera encountered Vladislav Kanyus, a young man of her age. Unlike Vera, Vlad, as he was commonly known, was a complete contrast. He did not have life goals, was introverted, and had a quick temper. Having dropped out of school after the 9th grade, Vlad grew up in a troubled home. After his mother abandoned the family, he was left to live with his father. Unfortunately, his life was filled with more challenges. His father had frequent run-ins with the law, which ultimately culminated in him taking his own life in front of Vlad, leaving an indelible mark on him. Vera fell in love with Vlad despite having little in common with him. However, her parents were against their relationship, knowing Vlad's troubled past. Vera's father discovered her relationship with Vlad, and he asked her to end it. Instead of breaking up with Vlad, Vera just stopped discussing him with her parents. Vlad was never present at family gatherings, and his pictures were not posted on Vera's social media. It seemed as though Vera was keeping him a secret, according to Oksana, Vera's mother. One important detail is worth noting. In 2019, Vera and Vlad began cohabiting in Kovo. Vera's parents financially assisted with the apartment, and Vlad, who was unemployed by choice, thoroughly enjoyed living with Vera, who was not only beautiful and intelligent, but also financially secure. She consistently had money and supported him. However, their relationship was strained. Vlad struggled with alcohol addiction and showed no inclination to seek help or change his behavior. Her parents were convinced that Vlad was abusive to her. After years of suffering, Vera made the brave decision to end the toxic relationship in November 2019. However, Vlad refused to accept this and disputed her choice. As her parents had financially supported the couple's apartment, Vera reasonably expected Vlad to vacate the premises. But Vlad was unwilling to give up the benefits of living off someone else's generosity. Now here's an excerpt from Vlad's testimony. It will give you a more accurate idea of what happened after Vera decided to end her relationship with him. But remember, this is Vlad's testimony, so it's up to you whether you believe his words. On December 15, 2019, a fight broke out between him and Vera over his desire to visit a nightclub, which she opposed. This was not their first disagreement. Throughout their relationship, Vera had been frequently visiting Selos and drifting away from him. She even confessed to speaking with another person. In fact, she had ended her relationship with Vlad a month prior. He later discovered from a mutual friend that she was involved with Alexander, a resident of Selos. Although he had never met Alexander, when he confronted Vera, she acknowledged the relationship. At the time, they continued to cohabitate, but following their December 15 altercation, she left, taking some belongings with her. Despite their separation, they remained in contact by phone, and on January 12, 2020, he offered to assist her in relocating her remaining belongings to a new apartment. She agreed to meet him, and they scheduled a time for January 13th. They met in the afternoon, packed up both her belongings and his, since he too wanted to move out, and drank beer, lur, and vodka. They got drunk, but there was no conflict until he brought up the topic of their relationship and revealed that he knew about Alexander. She became enraged, swearing at him, insulting him, and starting to physically assault him, kicking him at least 5 times in the groin area and slapping him in the face at least 8 times. He only felt pain from the kicks, not the slaps. Vera instigated the physical fight, which made him angry because she had lied about not seeing another guy and was upset that he knew about her personal life. That was the testimony that Vlad told the police. Next, we'll discuss the other side of this story, which gives every reason to believe that Vlad was not honest in his testimony. Vera sent a voice message to her friend at 5:08 p.m. In the message, she mentioned that she was already at the apartment, packing her belongings. She expected to be settled into her new apartment around 6 p.m. and requested her friend's help to move her things from the taxi to the apartment. Just 3 minutes later, Vera sent a new voice message. She invited her friend to come to the apartment where she lived with Vlad and help her with the move. However, Vera did not have time to finish as Vlad intervened by saying, "No, no one's coming in here." So he was against Vera's friend coming to the apartment. It seems that the situation began to get out of control because 4 minutes later, at 5:15 p.m., Vera, in a low voice, asked her friend to come. It looks like this message was a call for help. She deliberately spoke in a low voice so that Vlad wouldn't hear her. At 5:25 p.m., Vera sends another voice message, and Vlad's dominant voice is heard again. He tells Vera's friend not to bother them and to wait for Vera to text her. At 7:19 p.m., Vlad recorded the voice message himself. From that moment on, Vera did not have access to her phone. She was left alone with the monster. But what happened next needs to be explained. At about 3 a.m., the neighbors from the same floor started waking up from the terrible screams coming from apartment 738. A witness called what was happening a massacre. The screams were so loud that 15 people gathered in the hallway near the apartment. Vlad's brother was among them, and he remembered Vlad's words and realized they needed to break down the door, since his brother had previously said that he would take Vera's life. The door to the apartment was made of iron, so the neighbors started looking for tools to force it open. All this time, Vera's heart-rending cries were coming from the apartment. People called the emergency service, and these calls eventually became part of a separate investigation. For 30 minutes, the police still weren't at the scene. It lasted until 6:30 a.m. During these 3.5 hours, people called the police, but no one came to Vera's aid. The witnesses made 7 calls to the emergency service while Vera was fighting for her life, but no one came. The last words they heard from behind the door were Vlad's. He said, "Vera, forgive me. I love you very much." In the end, the neighbors found a crowbar in a nearby parking lot and broke down the door. By this time, Vera was already dead, and Vlad was in the bathroom. He was very drunk. While Vera was painfully dying at the hands of her former boyfriend, and the neighbors were trying in vain to get help from the police, the 112 operators were talking about life, laughing, drinking tea, and were very unhappy that they were being disturbed. The police arrived only after it became known that Vera had died. Later, they will claim that there was no gas in one car and that there were no available officers as everyone was busy with other calls. As a result, the 112 operators and the police officers on duty that night were on trial too. The video from the police station was published during the investigation, but there is no point in translating it into English. I can describe it in just one word: indifference, and it is clear even without subtitles. But Vlad claimed there were no conflicts between him and Vera until 5 a.m. However, the forensic examination showed that he lied. Vera received her first injury 6 hours before her death, that is, at about midnight. It meant that Vlad Kanyus was beating and injuring her for 6 hours until she took her last breath. Her body bore around 100 injuries, including stab wounds, a broken nose, and broken ribs. Strangulation marks were also visible on her neck. If the police's inaction shocked you, then be prepared for what comes next, which will be just as astonishing. More than 1,000 people gathered for Vera Pekteleva's funeral. The church could not accommodate everyone. According to Oksana, Vera's mother, the funeral home spent 4 hours trying to restore Vera's face with makeup, but she still could not recognize her daughter. That's how serious her injuries were. Meanwhile, Vlad Kanyus was telling the investigators his version of what happened. He of course tried to downplay his role in this crime. He said about that night that when he started talking to her about our relationship, he suggested they should get back together and told her that he knew she was seeing another guy. A conflict between them started. She didn't like it. After that, she started swearing, insulting him, and hitting him. Namely, she kicked him at least 5 times in the groin area and hit him in the face at least 8 times with her palm. He didn't feel any pain when she slapped him. However, when she kicked him between the legs, he experienced physical pain. That is, Vera started hitting him first. It made him angry. He was angry that she lied and said she wasn't dating another guy. At the same time, Vera said that he was prying into her personal life because he knew everything about her. During this time, she continued to insult him, and he got angry and hit her several times with his palms, about 4 times on the head, but the blows were of small force. When he hit Vera, she fell to the floor, hitting the closet. She was lying on her stomach. She also hit him back, namely, she beat his head with her palms and fists. It was painful. He asked her to stop, but she didn't stop. He remembered she scratched his back. Then he decided to take her by the neck. He saw an iron that was on the floor. He took this iron and wrapped the iron cord around Vera's neck. After that, he tightened the cord around her neck slightly. He squeezed her neck for 1.5 minutes or 2. At that moment, he didn't realize that he could kill Vera with his actions. He didn't want to kill Vera. He was tightening the cord around Vera's neck because he wanted to scare her. He wanted her to lose consciousness. He wanted her to fall asleep for 15 minutes. After he removed the cord from her neck, she started making sounds, coughing or wheezing. When he removed the cord from Vera's neck, she was in a prone position, but then he put her on her back. At that moment, she was unconscious. At the same time, she made sounds, that is, wheezed. He thought she was fine. After a while, he started waking Vera up, but she was unresponsive. Then, he started listening to whether her heart was beating. He put his ear to her mouth, then to her heart. She had no pulse, she wasn't breathing. He don't remember what happened next. He remembered that at some point, he ended up in the bathroom. At the same time, he had a knife in his hands. He took a knife with me because he wanted to hurt myself. He didn't want to live because he realized that Vera was dead. He didn't want to kill her. After some time, the door to the apartment opened, and his brother and a police officer were inside. After that, he was told to get dressed. He was taken to the police station. He's sorry for what he did. He do not deny that it was his actions that caused Vera's death. He didn't want to kill her. He wanted to apologize to Vera's family. As you have noticed, Vlad has a selective memory. He remembered strangling Vera, but did not remember how he inflicted about 100 injuries on her. It was also unclear how Vera could have punched him in the face and scratched his back while she was lying on her stomach on the floor. During the interrogation, it also became clear how Vlad's brother ended up at the crime scene. After all, he lived in another city. Here's what Vlad told the police about it. He called his brother. He told him about what happened. He told him that Vera wasn't breathing, and his brother told me to call an ambulance and give her CPR. He tried to give her first aid. He tried to give her CPR and cardiac massage. During the investigation, it became known that he called his brother at about midnight and said that he was going to take Vera's life. At the second interrogation, when asked again about the injuries on Vera's body, he replied, "It was probably me who caused those injuries to Vera." He did not count the number of his blows, but these injuries that were found on Vera's body by the expert may have been caused by me. He don't remember how many times he hit her, but he think it's the same number as indicated by the expert. He admit he caused her all the injuries indicated in the report. He wanted silence. He didn't think about her suffering. She screamed and insulted him during their conflict. He didn't enjoy hitting her, but he didn't like her screaming. He wanted her to shut up. He didn't think about her suffering at that time. Vlad Kanyus also said he had consensual intimate relations with Vera that evening. The related charges were eventually dropped. It was difficult to prove the opposite. Police officers and emergency service operators were charged with negligence. It's hard to believe, but they were not suspended from work during the investigation and continued to provide ridiculous justifications. The prosecutor demanded real prison terms for all 5 defendants, but the judge decided otherwise. They received suspended sentences ranging from 1.5 to 2 years. The court also ordered each defendant to pay around $350 to the victims. Simultaneously, the police department had to pay approximately $111,000. The amounts have been converted from the Russian ruble to US dollars for easier understanding. The indictment states that the police officers had access to gasoline and should have taken appropriate measures to resolve the situation, but they did not consider it an urgent task. Both police officers refused to cooperate with the investigation and did not admit guilt. They claimed that when witnesses reported the woman's screams and cries for help, the investigation team was at another address where a man's corpse had been found. We may never know the full truth of what happened that night. Vera was not planning to stay in the apartment and had asked her friend for help with moving, suggesting that Vlad Kanyus may have forced her to consume alcohol when she was unconscious, then fabricated a story to make the event seem unintentional. In the summer of 2022, the court sentenced Vlad Kanyus to 17 years in prison, and he partially admitted his guilt. He was also ordered to pay around $45,000 in compensation. However, this verdict shocked Vera's parents, who planned to appeal, believing the punishment was too lenient. Surprisingly, Vlad Kanyus did not even serve a full year in prison. In November 2023, photos of him in military uniform appeared online, and in April 2023, it became known that he had received a presidential pardon after 6 months of participation in the ongoing armed conflict in Russia. He was also relieved of the obligation to pay any compensation to Vera's parents. Vera's case has caused widespread resonance in Russia, and the news about Vlad Kanyus's pardon has been equally controversial. The press secretary of the Russian president stated that there are specific procedures for granting pardons, including a confession of guilt by the convict and the possibility of redeeming oneself on the battlefield. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Alison Baden Clay. Alison Baden was born on July 1, 1968 in a Brisbane suburb. Raised in an affluent family, she developed a passion for ballet early on. After school, she pursued higher education, excelling academically and mastering 6 languages. At 25 in 1993, Alison won a local beauty pageant, showcasing her ballet skills. Following university, she secured a position in the HR department at Brisbane's Flight Centre, where her career quickly advanced, recognized by her boss as a bright and promising talent. It was here that Alison met Gerard, who would later become her husband. Gerard Baden Clay was born on September 9, 1970, in Bournemouth, UK. He came from a notable lineage, with his great-grandfather, Robert Baden Powell, being a famed British military leader and founder of the Scouting movement. Gerard was just a year old when his family moved to Zambia, his father Nigel Clay's homeland. After 8 years in Zambia, they immigrated to Australia. Gerard completed his education in Australia and pursued a degree in accounting. He eventually joined the Flight Centre for work, where he met Alison's. It was at the Flight Centre where Gerard encountered Alison, leading to a blossoming relationship. Gerard and Alison Baden Clay exchanged vows on August 23, 1997. Following their nuptials, they embarked on a global tour, including stops in South America, Switzerland, and a stint in London. Once back in Australia, Alison resumed her career at the Flight Centre, eventually rising to a management position. In 2002, she became pregnant and later gave birth to their first child, Hannah. After Hannah's birth, Alison chose to dedicate herself entirely to family life. During this period, Gerard explored various occupations and established a premium real estate agency in Brisbane in 2004, with his parents' involvement in the business. Known for his lively and self-assured demeanor, Gerard dedicated substantial time and effort to his work. The family grew with the birth of their second daughter, Sarah, in 2004, and their youngest, Ella, in 2006. They lived in a verdant home situated in the suburban area of Brookfield, Brisbane. Allison, primarily a homemaker, was deeply engaged in caring for her daughters. Over time, Allison noticed that Gerard was becoming increasingly distant and aloof. This reached a climax when he made the shocking admission that he no longer loved her. Gerard's behavior towards Allison changed, with him frequently criticizing her. He would berate her for making unappealing meals or for not keeping their home clean, sometimes labeling Allison as lazy and expressing that she no longer appealed to him romantically. In the face of these remarks, Allison chose to remain quiet, enduring the harshness of his words. She maintained a personal diary where she documented her enduring love for Gerard, the recurring disputes at home, her own feelings of guilt, and her determination to correct her perceived faults in hopes of rekindling his affection. Despite the turmoil within her family life, Allison managed to mask her inner struggles with an outward appearance of cheerfulness. She was consistently seen as a warm, benevolent individual, a devoted mother, and a loving spouse. In 2011, after the devastating floods in Queensland, Gerard's business faced financial difficulties, accumulating debts of approximately $1 million Australian dollars. That October, Allison discovered that Gerard was engaged in a secret affair with Tonya McKinley, a colleague at his agency. Gerard and Tonya had first crossed paths in 2008 when she was a client, and later, he hired her. At that time, Tonya, a 17-year marriage veteran with children, was experiencing marital troubles. The affair with Gerard quickly escalated, culminating in her divorce. Tonya was aware of Gerard's marital status. He had portrayed his relationship with Allison as platonic, claiming their marriage lacked intimacy and that he remained with Allison solely for their daughters. Gerard assured Tonya of a future together, including marriage. However, after nearly 4 years, Gerard had still not initiated divorce proceedings when Allison discovered the affair in October 2011. Gerard informed Tonya that they had to end their relationship. He terminated the affair, dismissed Tonya from his real estate business, and reconciled with his wife without Tonya, who held on to the hope of a future together. 4 months later, Tonya and Gerard were conversing over the phone while she drove home. They talked about an upcoming real estate conference scheduled for the next day. Unexpectedly, Gerard mentioned that Tonya would encounter Allison there. Upset by this foreseen development, Tonya questioned Gerard's delay in telling her and accused him of habitual dishonesty in response to her frustration and doubts about their future. Gerard apologized, reaffirmed his love, and reiterated his commitment to divorcing within 3 months. He emphasized his intention to leave Allison, mentioning her mental health struggles. The following morning, on April 20th at 7:14 a.m., a distressed Gerard contacted the police, reporting Allison's disappearance after a walk around 10 p.m. the previous night. Upon arrival at the Bowden Clay home, police observed deep curved scratches on Gerard's face, which he attributed to a shaving accident. During a further examination for photographs, police noticed small red marks on his chest, which Gerard explained as bites from a caterpillar encountered while changing an outdoor light. The house inspection revealed no overt signs of disturbance. It was orderly with the bed neatly made. Gerard was composed, getting his daughters ready for school and daycare. Police interviewed Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, who recalled falling asleep to their mother's lullabies and hadn't seen her since she turned off the light. The girls, tearful during questioning, described their parents as generally happy and good to each other. The police initiated a search in the vicinity and interviewed neighbors for any leads on Allison's whereabouts, but no one reported seeing or hearing anything out of the ordinary. The only clues discovered that day were a small blood stain in Allison's car and a strand of her hair in the trunk. A larger-scale search operation was soon underway, with rescue teams and volunteers scouring the nearby woods, wells, shafts, and dams close to the Bowden Clay residence. A mannequin was placed, dressed similarly to Allison's last known attire, to aid in the search efforts. As time progressed, the likelihood of finding Allison alive diminished. Her friends clung to hope, unwilling to consider the worst. Gerard, visibly distraught, tearfully spoke to the media, yearning for his wife's return. Concurrently, he advised his mistress, Tony, to halt their communication and keep a low profile, promising that they would eventually be together. A decade after Allison vanished, on April 30th, 2012, a boater found a decomposed body by the Colo Creek riverbank, around 8 miles from the Bowden Clay home. The next day, Gerard reached out to the insurance company to discuss claiming his wife's life insurance, valued at $800,000 Australian dollars. Shortly after, the body discovered under the bridge was confirmed as the 43-year-old Allison Bowden Clay by a medical examiner. The advanced decomposition made determining the exact cause of death challenging. Dental records confirmed Allison's identity, and she was dressed in the same outfit as when she disappeared. Forensic indications pointed to possible strangulation, leading to the classification of her death as a homicide. On May 11, 2012, St. Paul's Church hosted Allison Bowden Clay's funeral. Gerard, visibly distraught, shed tears throughout the service, consoling his daughters and extending solace to Allison's parents. The ceremony saw a large turnout, with hundreds in attendance. Concurrently, Gerard maintained discreet contact with his mistress, Tony, using public phones for communication. He apprised her of the tragic circumstances surrounding his wife's death and implored Tony to keep their clandestine relationship hidden from police inquiries. Gerard maintained his claim that Allison had gone for a walk around 10 p.m. and was gone by the time he woke up. However, contradictory evidence emerged. Detectives found that Gerard had charged his phone at 2 a.m. and was on his computer at 5 a.m., searching for information about the right to remain silent. Forensic analysis contradicted his claim of shaving cuts, suggesting the marks on his cheek resembled fingernail scratches. Additionally, no blood was detected on his razor. A biologist challenged Gerard's explanation of caterpillar bites on his chest, noting the absence of such caterpillars in the family's area that could have caused such marks. A botanical specialist concluded that the marks were not consistent with caterpillar bites. When Allison's body was discovered, her hair contained 5 distinct leaf types: eucalyptus, Chinese elm, crepe myrtle, cat's claw vine, and fishbone fern. Notably, 2 of these varieties, eucalyptus and Chinese elm, grew directly under the bridge where her body was found. Significantly, all 5 types of leaves and thorns were present in the backyard of the Bowden Clay family residence a month after Allison's funeral on June 13, 2012. 41-year-old Gerard Bowden Clay was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. Asserting his innocence, he vowed to fight the charges and sought bail, which was promptly denied due to concerns he might flee during questioning. Investigators contacted Tony, who disclosed the truth about their 4-year clandestine relationship. Notably, just days before Allison's disappearance, Gerard had sent Tony a letter promising that he would be with her by July 1st. The prosecution alleged that Gerard Bowden Clay murdered Allison to claim an insurance payout, clear his debts, and start anew with Tonya McKinley. They theorized that on the night of April 19, 2012, after putting their daughters to bed, Allison joined Gerard to watch TV. An intense argument is believed to have erupted, during which Allison scratched Gerard's cheek. DNA traces were found under Allison's nails, but their origin was undetermined due to degradation. The prosecution suggested that Gerard strangled Allison, dragged her body through the backyard, entangling her hair with leaves, then transported her in her car's trunk to the river, disposing of her body under a bridge. They believed Gerard expected the river to wash the body away, concealing his crime. He reportedly returned home, charged his phone, cleaned the house, and reported Allison missing the next morning. After the discovery of the body, he sought legal counsel for criminal defense and visited the lawyer's office. At the June 2014 murder trial of Allison Bowden Clay, the prosecution adamantly argued for Gerard's guilt. Gerard, however, steadfastly denied any involvement. In court, he admitted to a dispute with Allison, suggesting she might have left home late at night and, in her depressive state, possibly chosen to end her life. This theory was staunchly rejected by Allison's family and friends, who were convinced of her unwavering commitment to her daughters, believing she would never abandon them. Her friends voiced long-standing disapproval of Gerard, describing him as arrogant, disingenuous, and conceited, and believed Allison's deep love for him blinded her to these negative traits. At the trial, excerpts from Allison Baden-Clay's diary were presented, revealing her sense of isolation and control by Gerard, especially after their first child's birth. She felt lonely, confined to the home, and detailed Gerard's controlling behavior, including insulting her, tracking her conversations through a baby monitor, managing her finances, erasing relatives' contacts from her phone, and blocking their calls. Following Allison's demise, Gerard's attempt to claim the insurance payout was rejected, with the funds being withheld pending the trial's conclusion. Another key testimony came from Melissa Romano, who had never met Gerard in person, but spoke with him on the phone in 2009 regarding a real estate deal. She testified that after finalizing the deal, Gerard made a startling call to her, proposing, "I'm looking for someone to kill my wife." Romano, taken aback, questioned his motive, but Gerard abruptly shifted the conversation and ended the call, leaving the statement unresolved. Gerard Baden-Clay was convicted on July 15, 2014, and sentenced to life in prison, eligible for parole after 15 years. In 2015, he challenged his sentence, leading to a court ruling that the murder was unintentional and thus reducing his prison term. This verdict, however, triggered a massive public outcry, culminating in protests with about 4,000 participants, standing in solidarity with Allison's family. Responding to the public sentiment, in 2016, the High Court of Australia overturned the appellate court's decision, reinstating the original murder conviction. Consequently, Gerard Baden-Clay's parole eligibility has been deferred until at least 2027, while incarcerated. Initially, Gerard conducted himself as an exemplary inmate, but as time progressed, he adapted to prison life and became less restrained in his behavior, leading to an incident where he inappropriately touched a prison guard, resulting in a stern reprimand during his imprisonment. Gerard Baden-Clay also established a friendship with a 73-year-old businessman and millionaire, John Chardin, who was imprisoned for the manslaughter of his wife. Additionally, he developed a rapport with Mayan Carouse, a convict serving time for the triple homicide of his girlfriend and her two siblings. Following the trial of Gerard Baden-Clay, his former mistress, Tonya McKinley, moved to Bali, where she engaged in teaching and charity work. 4 years later, she relocated to the United Arab Emirates to continue her career in education. McKinley now leads a modest lifestyle and keeps her personal details under wraps. She occasionally connects with friends via social media using an anonymous account, cautious of Baden-Clay potentially locating her post-release. In her most recent media interaction, McKinley expressed remorse about the situation and clarified that she never intended harm to Allison. She also disclosed that Baden-Clay and Clay had been unfaithful to Allison with not only her but other women as well, including Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, the daughters of Gerard and Allison Baden-Clay. The children, Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, are being cared for by their maternal grandparents, Allison's parents. The entirety of Allison's estate, including any insurance money, was entrusted to her children in 2022. The eldest daughter, Hannah Baden-Clay, has completed her university education and has pursued a career in dancing, following in her mother's footsteps to honor Allison's memory. To address the critical issue of domestic violence, Allison's sister, Vanessa, founded a charitable organization dedicated to combating domestic abuse, raising awareness, and providing support to those impacted by such situations. Through this case, being able to recognize the signs of domestic and family violence is a crucial first step towards prevention. In Allison's case, there were numerous indicators, some more conspicuous than others. These signs included, but were not limited to, a sense of isolation from friends, family, and support systems, a significant degree of control over financial resources, and a gradual erosion of self-confidence and self-worth. Identifying these things early on is essential in order to address the underlying issues and provide the necessary support and resources to those affected by domestic and family violence. By being vigilant and attuned to the subtle and overt manifestations of this complex issue, we can take proactive measures to foster safer and more supportive environments for individuals and families. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Susan Reinert. Susan Gallagher Reinert was born in 1943 in the charming town of Ridgeway, located in northwestern Pennsylvania. Her parents were William and Jane Gallagher, with her father working as a newspaper business manager and her mother being a dedicated school teacher. These early influences played a significant role in shaping Susan's path. From a young age, it was evident that she was destined to follow in her mother's footsteps, displaying a passion for learning and an innate love for literature. Her educational journey commenced at Grove City College, where she crossed paths with a young Air Force man named Kenneth Reinhard. This chance encounter would go on to change the trajectory of her life. Susan and Kenneth fell in love during their undergraduate studies. Susan's hard work and commitment paid off when she graduated with a bachelor's degree. But she didn't stop there. She went on to earn a master's degree in English from Pennsylvania State University in 1966. In 1965, shortly after graduating from Grove City College, Susan and Kenneth got married and started a new chapter of their lives. As a military couple, they were stationed in various places across the country, first moving to the West Coast and living in Sacramento, California, before returning to the Northeast and settling in Rome, New York. They even spent some time in Puerto Rico before eventually finding their permanent home in the Philadelphia region in 1971. In 1974, Susan Reinhart, a dedicated teacher and loving mother, faced an unexpected twist in her life when she and Kenneth decided to separate. Despite the divorce, it was a peaceful parting, closing a chapter in their lives without legal disputes. Susan, a vibrant single mother, focused on creating a warm home for her two kids, Karen and Michael. Known for her warm and friendly nature, Susan was beloved by colleagues and students at Chestnut Walled Elementary School. Outside of her professional life, Susan dedicated time to Parents Without Partners. Following her mother's death, Susan, emotionally weighed down, found strength in her connection with the organization. Despite the challenges, she remained resilient, leaning on Parents Without Partners for support as she navigated loss and change. Her story took a mysterious turn in the months leading up to her disappearance. Her mother's death and a substantial inheritance added complexity to her life, yet Susan's strength and resilience, along with her support network, hinted at a resilient spirit facing the unknown. On Friday, June 22, 1979, Susan Reinhart and her two children embarked on what would be their last day together. Earlier that day, Michael, Susan's son, spent time with his father Kenneth, who worked as a senior personnel officer for Fidelity Bank in the neighboring suburb near Philadelphia. That evening, they shared a special moment by participating in a father-son softball game. However, the game was cut short when Susan arrived to pick up Michael at approximately 8:30 p.m. Michael made a call to Kenneth at home, apologizing for their early departure from the game. Later that evening, Susan reached out to her former in-laws, Florence and John Reinhard, with whom she maintained a warm relationship even after her divorce. With close to a full tank, Susan ensured she had enough fuel for the trip to Allentown, Pennsylvania, a town located about an hour north. Her plan was to attend a Parents Without Partners conference and use it as a weekend getaway for her and the kids. Susan had signed up to moderate a workshop and registered her two children for events that weekend. They intended to leave on Saturday morning and return later in the weekend. That Friday evening, around 9 p.m., 11-year-old Karen and 10-year-old Michael were outside collecting hailstones left behind by a summer storm. Approximately half an hour later, neighbors heard the distinct sound of Susan's orange-red Plymouth Horizon starting up. A few minutes later, the hatchback was no longer in Susan's driveway. Susan had left home with her two children, presumably heading to visit her boyfriend that evening before heading to the conference. Susan had a long-standing affair with William Bradfield, also a teacher. And despite the secrecy, it strained her marriage with Kenneth. Rumors spread that Susan and William might marry. On June 22, 1979, Susan set off on a trip with her children after visiting her boyfriend. Their planned destination was Allentown, approximately 49 miles to the north, where they intended to spend the night in a motel. However, the expected trip never took place. Instead, Susan and her 2 children vanished without a trace. 2 days passed without any sign of Susan Reinhardt and her 2 children. The days of uncertainty and worry were taking their toll on those who knew and loved them. Then on June 25, 1979, the orange Plymouth hatchback that Susan had been driving was discovered in the parking lot of the Houston Hotel in Harrisburg. This was 87 miles from Allentown and 97 miles from her home. Tragically, Susan Reinhardt's lifeless body was discovered in the back of her vehicle. The details of her tragic demise were gruesome. Her nude, battered body was bound in chains and curled up in the wheel well of her car. Her hands were bound, and she had 2 black eyes. It was evident that she had either been beaten with chains or bound so tightly that the chains had left bruises on her back. Even more horrifying, she had been administered a lethal dose of morphine. However, the whereabouts of her 2 children remained unknown, as they had seemingly vanished without a trace. The police searched for hours, hoping the children were with a babysitter. However, none of Susan's regular sitters, friends, or family had seen them that weekend. So, the police began looking for answers. First, the police plastered pictures of the Reinhardt family across newspapers for weeks, hoping to find any leads on the 2 missing children. This was before the internet and Amber Alerts were available. As the investigation continued, it was revealed that Susan Reinhardt had named William Bradfield, the man she believed she would marry, as the beneficiary of life insurance policies worth a substantial $730,000. This raised suspicions that the children might have been killed to clear the way for this financial windfall. However, William Bradfield had a solid alibi, as he was at the beach in Cape May, New Jersey, during the weekend when Susan was killed and her children disappeared. Several other teachers were with him and could vouch for his whereabouts. The police shifted their focus to Upper Marin High School, where Susan worked. The school was already dealing with its share of turmoil. The principal, Jay, was involved in a scandal. He had been the principal until the previous year, when he was relieved of his post. Jay was fired after he was arrested at a local shopping center, where a search of his Ford Granada revealed loaded handguns, a hooded mask, and various tools associated with burglary. Equally unsettling, a syringe filled with morphine was found in his trunk. Even before this, Jay's life was falling apart. His wife, Stephanie, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, and she would ultimately succumb to it in August of 1979. The following years saw her in and out of hospitals during this time. She began keeping a diary, in which she made note of her husband's bizarre behavior, which began to truly escalate during this period. He began to participate in group intimacy and swinging groups, which she herself was not too keen on, and this seemed to precede even more alarming behavior. In September of 1977, the couple's adult daughter, also named Stephanie, decided to return home to live with her parents. Stephanie brought her husband, Edward Hunsberger, with her, and the 2 moved into the Jays' home in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Stephanie was in the middle of a battle with cancer, so the family was in the midst of uncertainty, and it seemed like tensions were between all of them. Edward and Stephanie Hunsberger, Jay's daughter and son-in-law respectively, were no saints. Both had been battling heroin addiction for some time and had struggled to find and keep employment in the years preceding their move. Then, moving back home with Stephanie's parents was an act of desperation and a way for them to stay away from drugs. In the early months of 1978, just a few months after moving in with Jay Smith and his ailing wife, their daughter Stephanie and son-in-law Edward mysteriously went missing. The last known sighting of Stephanie and Edward was in February 1978, when they visited Edward's parents in North Wales, Pennsylvania. Upon leaving, they mentioned they would return for another visit soon, but they never showed up again. Edward also failed to meet with his probation officer as scheduled. Later that month, authorities would begin to reach out to their last known contact, Jay Smith, who would tell anyone interested in hearing his side of the story that Edward and Stephanie had left for California. According to him, the two had owed money to some drug dealers in the region and had fled to the West Coast, but he couldn't provide any more information than that. Edward and Stephanie had been living as nomads, so no one noticed their disappearance. Meanwhile, Jay was arrested for theft, and a search of his house revealed alarming findings alongside firearms. Authorities found marijuana, prescription pills, security guard uniforms, badges, and disturbing pornography. They also discovered nitric acid and stolen office equipment from a local school. Jay was connected to recent armed robberies matching his description and attire. While awaiting sentencing for theft, Jay's alibi witness, William, testified that they were on vacation during the robberies. However, the jury didn't buy it. Jay had an unsettling reputation at Upper Marin, earning the nickname the Prince of Darkness. Susan's autopsy indicated death from strangulation or suffocation, with a wide time frame for her demise. Investigators questioned Jay about his whereabouts during that period, but he couldn't provide a coherent answer. An official stated that there was enough morphine in her system to kill her 10 times over, strongly indicating an intentional overdose. Jay was eventually found guilty of a series of store robberies that occurred during the late 1970s, and on June 25, 1979, he was sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison, just as the investigation was intensifying. But that wasn't all. Even though Jay was imprisoned for his burglary charges, the police still saw him as the main suspect and began investigating his background further. Only then did they discover that Jay's daughter and husband had gone missing in a similar manner as Susan and her 2 children. The police suspected that there could be connections between the disappearance of the couple, Susan's death, and the disappearance of her children. Firstly, Susan was killed by a morphine overdose, and a large quantity of morphine was found in Jay's house a few months earlier. Secondly, a plastic comb with Jay's military unit insignia was discovered in Susan's car. The disappearance of his daughter and son-in-law bore a striking resemblance to the disappearance of Susan's children. The events that took place during this crime were truly shocking and left a lasting impact on the public, but the real shocker was yet to come. In the last weeks of July 1979, approximately a month after the discovery of Susan's body near Harrisburg, investigators stumbled upon a potential motive for this tragic crime: financial gain. On July 20th, 1979, a lawyer from Philadelphia filed a caveat in both Montgomery and Delaware counties on behalf of Susan's ex-husband, Kenneth Reinhard, and her brother, Patrick Reinhardt. This legal maneuver was intended to temporarily halt the processing of any will that Susan might have left behind in either county. The purpose was to allow these 2 parties, Susan's ex-husband and her brother, the opportunity to review the will. They chose to file this in both counties because Susan's residence in Ardmore, Pennsylvania, was situated near the county border, making it feasible for her to have filed a will in either location. The following week, it was revealed that just a few weeks before her tragic death, Susan had made significant changes to her will. She'd also acquired several expensive life insurance policies, designating her boyfriend at the time as the beneficiary. In her legal documents, she referred to him as her future husband. As the police delved deeper into the case, they learned that Susan's death occurred sometime between midnight on Saturday, June 23, 1979, and midnight on Sunday, June 24th. William and the other teachers arrived in Cape Cod at 5 a.m. on Saturday, where they stayed until the afternoon of Monday, June 25th. However, William's exact whereabouts during the time of Susan's disappearance remained unclear, suggesting a potential gap in his alibi. It also revealed that Susan had been withdrawing substantial sums of cash from her accounts, totaling approximately $25,000, which she did through several deposits due to daily withdrawal limits. She informed bank employees that she intended to invest the funds in multiple high-yielding investments managed by her boyfriend, William Bradfield, whom she referred to as her future husband. What Susan didn't know was that she was just one of several women in William's life. He was dating multiple people, including one of their fellow English teachers, with whom he had maintained a secret relationship for nearly a decade. Allegedly, William had promised to handle these financial transactions and assured her that the investments would yield substantial returns to fund their upcoming marriage and relocation to England. When investigators looked into the case, they discovered fake stocks and bonds inside Susan's home, which initially puzzled them. However, it later became clear that William had given these fraudulent securities to Susan, having forged and sold them to her. These bogus securities were linked to mostly non-existent companies and held little value, pointing to a long-running deception by Susan's lover. This revelation added a new dimension to the story, intensifying the existing financial motive. In March 1980, William was called to testify in a civil suit, but during his initial appearance, he refused to answer questions, deferring inquiries to his legal counsel. His lawyers, on the other hand, denied that he had taken Susan's money, but were open to negotiating a settlement with the state to resolve the matter and process Susan's will, which stood to be $7 million. In June of 1980, William testified for the first time as part of the civil trial. He downplayed almost every connection he had to the case. William claimed his relationship with Susan was not as serious as she had told her friends and family. He also testified that he and Susan had not been planning to get married later that year, despite Susan telling numerous confidants otherwise. Furthermore, William implied that Susan had engaged in a secret affair with Jay Smith, the former principal of Upper Merion High School, but this was not supported by any evidence. Many friends and family members recalled Susan being in a long-term relationship with William, but they did not mention a relationship with Jay Smith, who was in the state prison during the trial. William refused to explain why Susan had named him the beneficiary of an estate worth more than $1 million. He portrayed Susan as an unreliable person, always in trouble, and blamed her for her own problems, stating he was just helping to clean up her messes. As the civil suit into the missing $25,000 progressed, Susan's brother and ex-husband filed a separate lawsuit in June 1980, aiming to recover the full amount of an insurance policy taken out on Susan's life just weeks before her death, around $450,000, and move the funds into a trust for a private investigation. The case took several unexpected turns, and the twists kept coming. On February 20, 1981, police arrested William on 2 counts of theft and 1 count of conspiracy, alleging that he had kept the $25,000 Susan had given him, ostensibly for investment. A former student of William's, Wendy Ziegler, was also charged as a co-conspirator. William was released on bail on February 23, 1981, but the criminal trial was set for the following month. Before the criminal trial began, the original civil suit came to a resolution. It was announced that $36,000 would be allocated from Susan's estate to pay for further investigations into the whereabouts of the children and contest the rest of Susan's will, preventing William from receiving any funds. On August 3, 1981, William's 5-day trial ended with a guilty verdict for theft. Delaware County Prosecutor Edward Weiss requested an increase in William's bond from $25,000 to $75,000, as they believed the conviction increased the flight risk, particularly given the looming possibility of murder charges. This request was granted by Judge Robert A. Wright. On April 6, 1983, William was taken into custody by Pennsylvania state troopers and charged with 3 counts of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and obstructing the administration of the law. The grand jury's findings pointed to William's awareness of the plot to kill Susan and her children and his alleged complicity in these crimes. However, J.J., who was believed to be involved, wasn't charged at that time. The indictment relied partially on a confession from an inmate named Proctor Noel, who claimed that William had confessed to his involvement in the murders during a chess match in prison. The arrest of William Bradfield in April 1983 marked a turning point in the case. While there was no direct evidence linking William to the murder of Susan Reinhardt or the disappearance of her 2 children, prosecutors were confident in their case. William's prior theft conviction added context, and the connection to persons unknown, believed to be responsible for disposing of the bodies, further implicated him. In the 1980s, Jay Smith, who was serving time for unrelated convictions, was unable to avoid testifying before a grand jury, despite asserting his Fifth Amendment right. William Bradfield was called to testify in 1984, but the details of his testimony remained undisclosed. This round of questioning was believed to be related to Jay Smith's missing daughter and son-in-law, Stephanie and Edward Hunsberger. In April 1985, Jay was asked to provide handwriting samples, likely related to documents written years before that may have detailed a plan to murder Susan Reinhardt. This eventually led to Jay's arrest on June 25, 1985, exactly 6 years after Susan Reinhardt's body was found. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and taken into custody while awaiting trial. Joseph Wall, a noted crime author, released a book about the case in 1984, favoring the theory that JJ was the actual killer. A TV miniseries adaptation followed, further exposing the case to a national audience. JJ continued to maintain his innocence from prison, attempting appeals and alleging that he'd been framed by William Bradfield. It wasn't until 1989 that the court decided to revisit his case and discovered issues with the prosecution, leading to a new trial in 1990. Jay waived his right to a speedy trial to allow for a full investigation. By 1992, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in Jay's favor, vacating his murder conviction and finding issues with the prosecution's conduct. Over the next 2 decades, the state did not retry the case, allowing JSJ to live the rest of his life as a free man. William Bradfield continued to evade court rulings, refusing to repay the $25,000 he owed to Susan Reinhardt's estate. The lawsuit was finally settled in 1996. Jay filed lawsuits against the state and Joseph Wall, alleging defamation and conspiracy, but both lawsuits were ultimately dismissed. On January 16, 1998, William Bradfield, who had been incarcerated for over a decade, was found unresponsive in his cell and pronounced dead of cardiac arrest. Kenneth Reinhard, Susan Reiner's ex-husband, passed away in June 2002 without knowing the fate of his 2 missing children. JJ, whose sentence was vacated in 1992, went on to write books about the case and remarried in 2002. He died on May 12, 2009, with his involvement in the story and the 1978 disappearance of his daughter and son-in-law, Stephanie and Edward Hunsberger, still unresolved. To this day, these cases remain unsolved. The Reinhardt murders is a story that continues to shock people with its many twists and disturbing revelations. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Diana Quer. On the morning of August 22, 2016, residents of the small Spanish town of Pobo do Caramal, hurrying to work, discovered flyers posted throughout the town. Dedicated volunteers had tirelessly pasted them on every building. The flyers featured a photograph of a young 18-year-old woman named Diana Quer. The young woman had a very slender build, standing about 6 feet tall. Her black hair, brown eyes, and delicate features made her appearance quite captivating. The evening before her disappearance, she was wearing pink shorts, a t-shirt, a white sweatshirt, and black sneakers. The description said her left home the night before and suddenly disappeared. Since last night, her family, along with volunteers and special services, have been desperately and tirelessly searching for the missing girl in every possible way. They have thoroughly searched every street and explored every corner, hoping to find some trace and bring Diana home. Juan Carlos, Diana's father, was in Madrid but wasted no time in contacting the police to trace the calls from his daughter's phone and find out the last location of her phone. He also contacted the local newspaper and urged residents to help with the search. If you have any information, even the smallest, contact the police. The police need your help, Diana's father reported. Diana's mother, deeply distressed, pleaded with the public, "We are doing everything we can to find Diana, but we still haven't gotten any answers. If you have any information, please help us. We are in a situation where even the slightest rumor can become important and help us find our daughter." Diana Quer was born on August 12, 1998, in Madrid. She was the daughter of Diana Cristina Lopez Pinel Pinjo and Juan Carlo Quer, and had a sister named Valeria. The family was quite wealthy and closely related. However, in 2013, Diana's parents divorced, which greatly affected the sisters. They faced depression and often conflicted over the attention of their mother, who took most of the care of them. Despite this, the father saw his daughters regularly during vacations. Diana, her mother, and sister often visited the small coastal town of Pobo do Caramal, which had a population of around 10,000. In the summer of 2016, Diana's family spent their vacation as usual in the cozy town of Pobo do Caramal. Every summer, they returned here to enjoy the tranquility and beauty of the place. Sunday, August 21st, was expected to be just like any other day. In the evening, around 10, Diana approached her mother and informed her that she was going to Val Inclán Park to meet her friends and have fun in celebration of the Feast of the Virgin Carmen. Val Inclán Park was not far from the cottage where the family was staying, and it was a place where Diana often walked. Her mother, seeing nothing unusual about this, allowed her to go there again. She spent that evening joyfully with her friends. 4 hours later, Diana said goodbye to her friends and was about to return home, unaware that this would be their final farewell. On her way, she encountered her acquaintance, Pazo de Ariel, not far from the pizzeria where Diana frequently spent time. It was around 2:30 in the morning when they parted ways. Pazo de Ariel was the last person to see Diana on that fateful night. The morning of August 22, 2016, turned into a nightmare for Diana's mother, Maria Quer Lopez Pinel. At 8:30 in the morning, she realized that something was wrong with her daughter. She had not returned home from a party. Her cell phone was either turned off or out of range, which caused alarm. The mother decided not to wait and immediately called the police, reporting her daughter as missing. Based on the information provided by the mother, it could be concluded that Diana did not have any serious emotional or mental health issues, despite a troubled childhood due to her parents' divorce. Her prolonged absence was very unusual and raised serious concerns. Police began to investigate the complex and confusing events surrounding the disappearance of Diana Maria Quer Lopez Pinel. Investigators had to determine what happened when Diana disappeared without leaving any trace. It turned out that Diana's last messages were sent to a friend of hers from Madrid via WhatsApp. In these messages, she wrote about a certain stranger who was stalking her and shouting strange phrases, scaring her. These messages were Diana's last contact with the outside world. She no longer responded to the messages, although they had been read. The next day, the police began to retrace the route Diana had to take to get home. It was along the road that they found a black hairband that looked very similar to the one Diana had been wearing that night. This was the only item recovered from the scene of her disappearance, but investigators had no other evidence. Diana's friends were unable to provide any helpful information, and there were no CCTV cameras on the final part of her journey. The street was dimly lit and sparsely populated, with just a few garages and a rundown Boomerang nightclub lining the road. Some witnesses reported seeing Diana get out of a car with 3 other people and then move to a different car that drove her away from the port. However, these accounts were not confirmed. Investigators considered 2 main hypotheses. The first suggested that Diana was kidnapped by someone she might have known, while the second linked her disappearance to a potential attack by a mentally unstable individual. Diana's mother even proposed a third scenario in which her daughter could have been taken away on a boat. Diana's friend and ex-boyfriend reported that she met a man from Morocco, and together they purchased hashish. However, this information only complicated the picture of her disappearance. An important point was the media reports about the discovery of the clothes Diana wore that evening. But her mother denied this information, claiming that no clothes were found. Additionally, her credit card and identification were left in the house, so Diana could not have simply run away, leaving all her belongings and documents behind. This fact and other circumstances confirmed that her disappearance was not voluntary. Nevertheless, the case remained mysterious and could not be solved. Shortly after Diana's disappearance, the press reported on the quarrel that had occurred between Diana and her mother just a few days before the tragic event. The media claimed that Diana had suffered a nervous breakdown that required medical attention, and that her younger sister Valeria had also been hospitalized with similar symptoms. To prevent further litigation and conflict, the custody rights to the younger sister were transferred to the father on Thursday, September 5th. This was a preventive measure to avoid further strife in the local community, which was already gripped by an unsettling atmosphere over Diana's disappearance. The father and his daughter left town, and rumors began to spread that the family was hiding something significant. According to Diana's friends, running away from home was a common occurrence for the sisters, especially for her younger sister Valeria, who was only 16 years old. The family dynamics were complicated, and arguments between the mother and the daughters were not uncommon. This information became public, and the immediate question that arose was, why was the mother so anxious when Diana didn't return home if her had frequently left home before? On Wednesday, August 31st, Diana's parents did not show up for a scheduled press interview where they were scheduled to provide details about the investigation. The family lawyer explained that the parents were emotionally devastated at the thought that they might never see their daughter again. The newspaper El Mundo published an article on September 11th that shed light on other aspects of the family's life. It said the mother's statement that Diana did not have mental problems was contradicted by information about her disappearance in April, during which time Diane left home for 3 days and her mother did not contact the police. She would turn off her phone to anger her mother and said she no longer wanted to live with her. Letters written by Diana and Valeria to each other also appeared in the press, from which it became clear that both sisters were going through serious emotional problems. Valeria has even been hospitalized several times over the past year, once having to have her stomach pumped due to an overdose of prescription drugs. In the absence of progress in the investigation into Diana's disappearance, prosecutors have launched an investigation into the abuse of the Lopez family's youngest daughter, Valeria. The investigation into Diana's disappearance continues to be intense and is moving at full speed. Forensic experts seized several items belonging to her, including a toothbrush, a comb, a personal computer, her diary, and some prescription medications. These items were subjected to a thorough analysis. Investigators then began questioning Diana's acquaintances, including a young Moroccan man with whom Diana had a brief affair. All of these measures failed to yield the desired results, and further police searches remained unsuccessful. The police conducted extensive searches in the mountains, forests, rivers, and lakes near the site of the disappearance. However, it appears that Diana disappeared around 3 a.m., and the last signal from her phone was found in the Tarragon area, 13 miles from where the family was staying. 72 days after her disappearance, Diana K's case remained a mystery, as none of the investigators' leads have yet been confirmed. In addition to a hairband, police found a cell phone that matched the description of Diana's phone, and her father confirmed that it was his daughter's cell phone 2 months after her disappearance. Diana's Facebook profile was suddenly active, and friends and relatives immediately notified the police and provided screenshots. It turned out that the Remember Password function had been used to avoid entering profile login details, leaving two theories. Either Diana had forgotten her password, or the attacker was trying to gain access to her profile. Diana's phone was a crucial piece of evidence in the case, but it failed to provide any insight into the mysterious disappearance. On November 10, 2016, the driver of the very car in which Diana was last seen was finally identified. The man had previously been detained on charges of human trafficking, and information about his potential involvement in Diana's disappearance was kept secret for a long time, so as not to disrupt the ongoing investigation. His wife claimed that he was with her that night, which initially excluded him from the list of suspects. However, on December 25, 2017, an incident occurred that became a pivotal point in the investigation. One of hers was attacked by a man demanding her phone and threatening her with a weapon. The terrified victim screamed, and a couple passing by came to her aid, rescuing her from the thug who tried to pull her into a car. The shaken victim immediately contacted the police, providing a description of the perpetrator and his license plate number. The next morning, police arrested 41-year-old Jose Enrique Abinay, who was also known as Elo. The man already had a criminal past. The police immediately discovered that Jose Enrique was the same driver who had been detained in 2016 on suspicion of kidnapping Diana. However, he was released at the time because the police believed the alibi provided by his wife. The police questioned the suspect and his wife again, and as a result of the interrogation, the wife admitted that she had previously lied, and that in fact, on the night of Diana's disappearance, her husband had been out of the house and did not return until 4 a.m. Jose Enrique was eventually forced to admit that he accidentally hit Diana on the road and then was afraid to go to the police, which is why he decided to dispose of the body. However, he later changed his version of events, confessing to kidnapping and killing Diana. According to him, he came to the seashore to pick up gasoline from abandoned cars, and it was there that he saw Diana. Jose kidnapped her, tried to force her to have sexual intercourse, and then strangled her. This shocking truth revealed new details about the case and confirmed that Diana K. Lopez's disappearance was the result of a horrific crime. The disappearance of Diana K. Lopez was a long and traumatic experience for her family and everyone following the case. Nearly 500 days of investigation and continuous media speculation only added to the anguish of her loved ones. The accusations directed at Diana's parents only served to confuse and impede the investigation. Despite this, through persistent investigation and the testimony of a second victim, investigators were able to gather the necessary evidence and find the perpetrator. Diana will be remembered by her loved ones as a bright and vivacious young woman who was unlucky enough to find herself in the path of a violent criminal. Her story serves as a reminder of how important it is to unite in the difficult moments of fighting crime, to end impunity, and ensure the safety of all citizens. Unfortunately, the perpetrator did not admit for a long time where he hid Diana's body, but later, family and friends managed to say goodbye to Diana and give her a proper burial. The body was found in the well of an abandoned warehouse in January 2018. Jose was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 35 years. El Chicle was initially held at the A Lama and Teixeiro prisons in Galicia, but was later transferred to the Vilo prison near Leon to avoid potential retaliation from former associates and rivals in the cocaine trade. His prison correspondence showed no signs of remorse, and he even tried to implicate his ex-wife in the murder. At Villa Hierro, he became a dominant figure, and his fellow inmates included David Ubel, another Galician from Morania, who was the first person to be sentenced to life imprisonment since the reintroduction of this sentence in 2015. The missing person case and the subsequent murder trial received extensive media coverage. Some news outlets were criticized for relying on morbid fascination or sensationalism in their reporting. In October 2019, the same program was condemned by Quer's family for broadcasting an alleged last photograph of the murder victim. as the relatives believed it was implying that her clothing was responsible for her death. Some authors believe that Quer's case received disproportionate media coverage because she was young, wealthy, and female. In contrast, the case of Ivan Duran, a 30-year-old man from nearby Bayona who went missing 3 days later, did not receive as much attention. Duran's father said that the police resources were disproportionately focused on the search for Quer. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sierra Lamar. The story begins in Fremont, California. Sierra Lamar's family, consisting of her father Steve, a computer expert, her mother Marlene, and her older sister Danielle, lived in Fremont. Sierra was born on October 19, 1996, while Danielle was around 4 years her senior. The family experienced some common ups and downs. It was later discovered that when Danielle and Sierra were younger, their father Steve had engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior with one of their school classmates during a sleepover. This led to his 1-year imprisonment. Despite Steve's prior convictions, Sierra and Danielle said they got along well with him and that he had always been a kind and respected father. However, after the incident, Steve and Marlene decided to end their relationship. Marlene eventually decided to relocate from Fremont to Morgan Hill, a city located approximately 40 miles southwest of Fremont. She made this move together with Sierra and her boyfriend, Rick Gardner. Sierra was initially disappointed to be leaving her close friends and hobbies behind, but she eventually settled in at her new school, made new friends, and even rejoined the cheerleading squad. On March 11, 2012, Sierra called her parents in Fremont to update them on her progress. The discussion was mostly joyful, as she was enthusiastic about one of her upcoming school tasks and mentioned wanting to get her hair colored. The next time she went to Fremont, she told her sister all about her homework. She was obviously doing quite well in her academics. Sierra ended the chat with Danielle and Steve shortly after dinner because it was a Thursday, she had school the next day, and it was getting late. They all agreed to part ways for the evening and promised to speak again soon. However, none of them realized that this would be Danielle and Steve's final conversation with Sierra. February 16, 2012, it was an ordinary workday back in Morgan Hill. The Gardner-Lamar family got ready for the day as usual around 6 in the morning. Rick awoke to head out to work shortly after, and Marlene arrived to kiss Sierra on the forehead before heading out to work as well. Sierra had to get ready for school and lock the house. At this point, at 6:29 a.m., she texted a friend before putting on her shoes and walking out the front door to catch the bus. Pito Hispanic Court was situated far from Sierra's high school and the rest of Morgan Hill. Sierra had to cross a deserted road between Palm and Dory Avenues every morning to catch the bus, just like many other children across America. While on her way at 7:11 a.m., she texted a friend to see if they could meet up before classes started. But when her school bus arrived at 7:15 a.m., just 4 minutes later, Sierra was not present. Sierra may have skipped class or even the entire school day because she didn't meet up with her friend. Her friends found it unusual that she didn't show up, but they didn't think it was wise to inform the school without her. The day proceeded as normal. Marlene routinely contacted Sierra after school to check on her, but found it unusual that her phone went straight to voicemail. However, she did not become worried. But when Marlene arrived home and saw that her daughter's room was still unoccupied, she realized that something was amiss. She contacted Steve to check if Sierra was planning to visit him in Fremont again. Unfortunately, this was not the case. When Sierra called Danielle and a few of her friends, they all left the same message. Marlene started to panic when she called Sierra's high school and found out that Sierra had missed all her classes. After calling the authorities, officers were sent immediately to Pito Hispanic Court. However, since Sierra could have disappeared at any time, there was no clear starting point for the investigators. Those closest to Sierra, including several of her friends, were questioned first, and they were all very honest about the predicament that Sierra and her family were facing. Even though she was usually content, it had only been a few months since her mother's divorce had compelled her to leave her family and all of her old friends behind. Authorities believed that because she frequently made lighthearted and even serious comments about returning to Fremont, she had most likely left voluntarily. Despite the fact that the police downplayed Sierra's disappearance, other factors were moving in the exact opposite direction. She not only said nothing, but she also stopped posting anything to her social media accounts. She never arrived at the front door, her phone was off, and all calls went to voicemail. Naturally, Sierra's loved ones and friends were terrified. Thus, the massive search for Sierra Lamar got underway. Despite the police's ineffective attempts, the trail of evidence related to Sierra's disappearance is currently one of the longest, most intricate, and most fascinating cases I've ever covered. The investigation began on Sunday morning, 2 days after she vanished. Data forensics were examining the previous data from her phone when they discovered that it had sent a signal without any electrical activity in the middle of the night. The phone appeared to have been turned on briefly before being turned off again, and the coordinates on the phone led them to a field near Sierra's house. At dawn, a search team carefully combed through the fields where the phone had been detected, and after just a few minutes, they found it. The Samsung Galaxy that Sierra had been using was located near the road, and it had sustained significant physical damage. It was assumed that her phone had likely been thrown off the road. Investigators concluded that she had not turned on her phone that evening. Instead, they reasoned that the rain had caused a false signal, briefly activating her phone. What a fortunate coincidence. This was the conclusion of the story, which heavily relied on the authorities finding the woman's phone. The events that occurred were caused by a raindrop and a short circuit. Given the nature and circumstances of the case, the detectives found the possibility of the woman's phone being thrown from a moving vehicle to be particularly concerning, considering the lack of footprints, tire tracks, or any other visual evidence. The next day brought about yet another horrifying discovery. 2 kilometers from Sierra's house, a search crew found her backpack thrown just outside a barn. She had expected to go to school and was probably pushed away from her own essential items, as the bag included her schoolwork, inhaler, and money. Sadly, things only get worse from here. Additionally, a complete outfit, possibly the one she was wearing the morning she vanished, was found in her luggage. This ensemble included her pullover, pants, socks, shoes, and even undergarments. Her outfit was subjected to DNA testing, and the results were revealed. Her pants contained male foreign DNA, which suggested that she had likely been assaulted. Although the search had already intensified significantly in the days following Sierra's disappearance, the discovery of her phone and clothing sparked a fresh outpouring of local and international sympathy. Authorities received more than 1,000 fresh tips, and officers worked more than 7,000 hours. Several search teams were composed of more than 800 people. They examined every available lake and reservoir in the area, methodically combed over fields, and looked inside abandoned buildings. Sierra's name was a hot topic in the community, and posters for missing people were put up all over the place. Additionally, Sierra's parents offered a $10,000 reward to anyone with credible proof. However, despite their best efforts and those of the community, only a golf ball and a flipper were discovered. Investigators were closing in on a culprit, though the public was unaware. 12 days after Sierra's disappearance, DNA on her pants matched a local man. All 57 registered sex offenders in the area were investigated, and Sierra's father was quickly eliminated as a suspect. Anlin Garcia Torres, a 21-year-old man with a troubled past, emerged as a suspect after a successful DNA match. The suspicious relationship between Sierra and Anlin caused detectives to place him under constant watch. Nobody knew if Sierra was still alive or not, but Anlin was the most likely to know at this specific moment. The officers thus took a number of steps to keep an eye on his whereabouts and means of communication. His phone was tapped, a GPS tracker was covertly placed in his car, and 2 undercover police investigators shifted into an RV next to his house. After finding that the RV park had cameras at the front door, investigators also started looking through security footage from the neighborhood around Anlin. They examined this film on the day of her disappearance to determine whether Anlin had left or arrived home. At 7 a.m. on the morning Sierra vanished, Anlin's travel time of 7 miles from his home to Sierra's was a perfect match for the period during which Sierra could have been kidnapped, even though Anlin had departed for work at his normal time. Safeway's shift records showed that Anlin did not show up for work on March 16th. When his management inquired further, they discovered additional unfavorable information about Anlin. It turns out that just 3 years prior, 3 unsuccessful kidnapping attempts had occurred in this Safeway's parking lot. Thankfully, none of the perpetrators were ever formally recognized or detained. The only piece of evidence from each of these attempted kidnappings was a taser that the perpetrator had dropped. One of its batteries had a fingerprint on it. However, it was only a partial fingerprint, and only a direct 1-to-1 comparison could match it. The theory of Anlin being the suspect seemed plausible, but when Anlin's fingerprints were compared to those on the taser, a startling realization emerged. In reality, Anlin was the suspect. The suspect was now in the hands of the investigators. He was positively identified as being present when Sierra vanished. His DNA was discovered on her pants, and he has a history of involvement in kidnappings. This was sufficient to detain him, question him, and seize his automobile for DNA testing. In spite of Anlin's arrogance during the interview, the test results were unfavorable for him. He stated that the day Sierra vanished, he went fishing, that he had no idea who Sierra was, and that he was certain they would not discover anything. However, Anlin did not end his interview before making a very peculiar revelation. Anlin admitted to having the somewhat vile habit of masturbating while driving and disposing of the used tissue out the window. Additionally, he asserted that he had tossed out a used tissue in the precise spot where Sierra's bag was discovered on the morning she vanished. The cops didn't believe his absurd explanation. Anlin Garcia Torres was formally detained on May 21, 2012, in connection with the disappearance of Sierra Lamar, outside of his place of employment in a Safeway parking lot. This resulted from a number of distinct linkages between Sierra and Anlin's vehicle. Her DNA was found on the interior door handle of the car's rear door, according to a DNA examination. Additionally, fibers from Anlin's car seats matched those found on Sierra's clothing, and a piece of rope discovered inside his car included a hair strand from Sierra. This proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that she had been in his car at some point. But even after his arrest, the situation still had a serious flaw. Even though it might have looked evident what had happened to Sierra, her body had yet to be discovered. Could they really accuse Anlin of first-degree murder in the absence of a body or a death that had been verified? Yes, in reality. Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen said on May 19, 2014, that he would be requesting the death penalty against Anlin, although Anlin had previously entered a plea of not guilty to killing Sierra. There was little to no room for error given the overwhelming body of evidence that pointed to his guilt. All the way to the end, after being delayed, Anlin's trial finally got underway on January 30, 2017. The trial was drawn out and stressful for all parties, with long arguments from the prosecution and defense during the more than 13 weeks of testimony. The defense team for Anlin tried to argue that his exposure to pesticides from surrounding fields as a child may have psychologically affected his cognitive capacities, and therefore, the crime was not his fault. They considered this to be an interesting aspect of the trial. Additionally, they argued that he shouldn't be eligible for the death penalty because he had nothing to do with the toxic exposure. And under those circumstances, they claimed that this was a deficit he faced, which other people did not. In a last-ditch effort, Anlin's defense team asked for a new trial after casting doubt on the reliability and honesty of the chief investigator and asserting that he had tampered with evidence in the past. This motion, though, was turned down. The jury convicted Annalyn Garcia Torres of Sierra Lamar's first-degree murder. On May 9, 2017, the evidence was so overwhelming against Annalyn that he was unable to escape responsibility for his acts, even though Sierra's body has never been located and her death has not been proven. Sierra's mother addressed him directly in court and declared, "I find it inconceivable to do a horrific, violent crime. You have hurt both our family and your family deeply. You have taken away from Sierra what God has in store for her, but you also have the option to repent and let us know where she is. I often reflect on her and what has been taken away from me as a mother. Simply put, it's difficult to accept that this took place, though it's reality. I still assume it's a dream when I wake up every morning." As numerous of Sierra's kin read letters to him in the courtroom, Annalyn remained quiet and motionless, and he has continued to insist that he is innocent. It follows that he has never said where Sierra's body might be, and regrettably, nobody knows what exactly happened to her on the day that she vanished. Outside the evidence offered, Annalyn was formally given a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after being spared the death penalty. Since his sentencing, Annalyn has remained largely silent and, despite receiving hundreds of letters from news organizations and total strangers, has only answered one letter. In this letter, Annalyn wrote, "I maintain my innocence, and I'm not going to discuss the matter." This letter is sent to a news reporter from Crone 4. "I do not trust the news, as there is a lot of selective reporting that presents an often inaccurate picture. Like many others, I believe everyone has a right to be heard, but sadly, those times are long gone." Actually, I'm not sure why Annalyn continues to maintain his innocence, as this is as obvious as day because of his DNA on Sierra's possessions, Sierra's DNA in his car, his prior criminal history, and a precise timeline. At least it was crystal clear that he was involved in Sierra's disappearance. There is no way she would still be missing if she were still alive, claim friends and family. Over a period of 3 years, volunteers carried out over 100 searches within a 15-meter radius, putting in a combined 50,000 man-hours of search effort in search of any information about the missing young woman. Even now, volunteers continue to search desperately for Sierra Lamar. The majority of them are aware that Sierra is probably deceased, but they still want to return her to her family and provide them with the closure they need. Nobody is certain where Sierra's body may be at this time, but hopefully, one day the Lamar family will receive the closure they seek. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ronell Burns. On November 6, 2021, around 9 p.m., a concerned neighbor called emergency services to report hearing frantic screams and multiple gunshots coming from a nearby house. Responding police officers rushed to the scene and entered the home, where they discovered the lifeless bodies of a man and a woman lying on the floor. Following a thorough examination of the crime scene, the police launched an investigation into the tragic incident. The victims were identified as Ronell and Kiana Burns, a married couple. The question on everyone's mind was, who would commit such a heinous crime and what could be the motive? The Burns family resided in a spacious house in Gwinnett County, an area known for its remarkable ethnic diversity. Although the house did not appear to have been burgled, with all belongings still in their original places, the police were able to uncover a crucial lead in the double murder case relatively quickly. Let's go back in time and uncover the true roots of the tragedy that befell the Burns family. We begin with Kiana, born on September 15, 1977, in St. Louis, Missouri. After graduating from Riverview Garden High School, she attended St. Louis Community College in Florissant Valley, where she studied cosmetology and eventually started building her career. Kiana's hard work and perseverance paid off, and she opened her own successful beauty salon, which became popular. She was driven by her dream of living a luxurious and wealthy life, and her dedication paid off over the next 20 years. With time, she transformed her salon into one of the largest in the St. Louis area. However, Kiana's personal life was not without its challenges. As a strong, wealthy, and ambitious woman, she found it difficult to find a worthy partner. By the time she was 44, she had 3 children from previous relationships, whom she loved deeply. Her family described her as a great and loving mother, a supportive friend, and a successful businesswoman. Kiana seemed to have it all when she met her future husband, Ronell Burns. Ronell Burns was born in St. Louis, Missouri, on May 14, 1975. After graduating from the High School of Fashion in 1994, he played on the basketball team and even competed for a state championship. With a driven and ambitious personality, Ronell thrived on competition and always aimed for greatness. Before meeting Kiana, Ronell had 2 children from a previous relationship. When they got together, they formed a strong and happy family, bringing together 2 successful and ambitious individuals. On September 13, 2012, Ronell and Kiana officially tied the knot in a beautiful wedding ceremony attended by numerous relatives and friends. However, after the wedding, Kiana began to notice new aspects of Ronell's personality. It turned out that Ronell had dedicated his life to Jesus Christ at a young age and wanted to spread the Lord's word. He started serving everyone he could, even strangers he met on the street. Ronell created a website where he coached and preached, claiming that God spoke to him in his early years, instructing him to help people, and that he had the power to make things happen in life. Ronell continued to minister, and his video messages became extremely popular on the internet. Apart from being a church coach, he was also a financial counselor and insurance agent. He founded a company called Traditional Financial Solutions, with the goal of helping people worldwide achieve financial independence. Ronell achieved significant success in his business and efforts to help others, and his speeches drew large crowds. Kiana supported her husband, and together they gained online popularity as Ronell was already well known as a leader and coach in the 6-Figure Ambition online program for entrepreneurs. He had a substantial online presence with over 7,000 followers on Instagram and 2,000 subscribers on YouTube, where he ran an educational video channel. Ronell and Kiana Burns merged their families and business expertise, and together they created something remarkable that touched thousands of people's lives. Kiana was a sought-after speaker at business events, where she shared valuable lessons and inspiration on how to succeed. She also had a large following on Instagram, with 14,000 followers, where she shared insights into her family life and inspirational quotes. In a popular video message, a stylish and well-branded couple shared their insights on entrepreneurship, highlighting how it had positively impacted their lives and those of thousands of their subscribers. They reiterated their mission to empower their audience with the skills to achieve success as entrepreneurs and build their own businesses, rather than being employed by others. The Burns family aimed to educate young entrepreneurs on how to invest their earnings wisely, generating passive income. They conveyed their belief in the potential of their students, emphasizing that you don't need to be exceptional to begin, but rather start taking action to achieve greatness. Despite showcasing their luxurious lifestyle to appeal to new students and subscribers, it was Kiana who had actually walked the path Ronell frequently described. She had built and operated a successful network of salons through hard work, contributing significantly to the family's wealth. Ronell, on the other hand, wanted to project an image of success, often posing in expensive attire. The family regularly posted photos from high-end restaurants, but in reality, successful individuals rarely have the time to engage in lengthy conversations, whereas those struggling financially were often drawn to the Burns' den, promises of easy wealth without effort, relying on Ronell's guidance. Ronell Burns established a company called 6-Figure Ambitions, allowing him to build his wealth and create a lasting legacy, which he frequently discussed in interviews. Ronell and his wife Kiana had built a close-knit family and were seen as inspirational role models by those around them. At the time, they had 3 children together, Rhea, McKay, and Ray. However, Ronell's ambition led him to suggest that Kiana leave her hometown of St. Louis and move to Atlanta. The real reason for the move was to expand their business, as Raul had taken over his wife's business and wanted to establish a chain of beauty salons in Atlanta. Owning 3 salons in St. Louis was no longer enough for him. Although Kiana was hesitant to leave St. Louis, she eventually agreed to the move. Despite her reservations, she continued to present a united front with her husband in public. On social media, Kiana portrayed her life as perfect, sharing photos of luxurious gifts from her husband, such as a Maserati Levante, and her extensive collection of Louis Vuitton bags. Each post was accompanied by captions expressing admiration and gratitude towards her husband. Kiana, a popular blogger, had built a loyal following on Instagram, where she frequently shared heartwarming moments with her children and family. However, in a surprising turn of events, she revealed to her audience that their seemingly perfect family life was not as idyllic as it appeared. In reality, she and her husband were on the brink of divorce, a situation that had developed after their move to Atlanta. In a candid video message, Kiana confessed to her subscribers that she was struggling to adjust to her new life in a big, unfamiliar city. She opened up about the difficulties of leaving her old life behind and starting anew, and how she relied on the support of her followers during this challenging period. Although Kiana's Instagram feed presented a picture of happiness and unity, behind the scenes, her family was going through a tough time. Her loyal subscribers were a source of comfort during the dark days, which had become increasingly frequent. When Kiana finally broke the news of her impending divorce, her followers were shocked. Her husband, Raul, subsequently went live on air to corroborate the news, revealing that they had made the decision to divorce 7 months prior. In a detached tone, Raul explained that they would continue to run their joint business venture, despite their decision to go their separate ways. Bloggers usually only share their positive experiences with their followers because they fear that revealing their failures and struggles will cause them to lose credibility and admiration. However, the case of the Burns family serves as a prime example of how social media can create a false impression of a wealthy lifestyle. Rael had quickly spent all the money Kiana earned from her beauty salons, and as a result, the family's debt to various banks exceeded $500,000 within just a few years. Just before the tragic event, the family's financial struggles had reached a crisis point, exacerbated by their recent move to an unfamiliar city. Kiana went live on social media, asking her fans to pray for her strength as she struggled to cope without the support of family and friends, especially while taking care of her children. In the live stream, she spoke about the recent changes in her life and how she and her husband had moved to Atlanta just 5 or 6 months prior to expand their business. Kiana emphasized the importance of prayer and having a supportive network of loved ones to help during difficult times. Kiana kept secret the true reason for the division in the family: Rael's repeated cheating and promiscuity, which was never visible in their public Instagram life. That same night, Kiana posted a cheerful video of herself dancing at home with one of her daughters. However, a tragic event occurred a few hours later. Kiana and Rael got into a heated argument, and in the aftermath, Rael was shot, and Kiana was found dead in another room with a gun in her hand, suggesting she was the one who made the decision. Some people believed Kiana was driven to kill her husband after discovering his infidelity, while others thought the couple was heavily in debt and that Rael was a con man who had cheated her financially. Investigations revealed that Rael was a serial cheater in his previous marriage, wasting his wife's money and leading to financial ruin. When Rael met Kiana, a successful career woman, their combined fortune and experience seemed promising. However, their business ventures eventually failed, leaving only Kiana's beauty salon operational. Despite Rael's lack of income, he continued to present himself as a successful businessman on social media, hiding their true financial struggles and relationship problems. Behind their pious Christian facade, Rael and Kiana lived a life of luxury, frequently quoting the Bible and flaunting their wealth on social media. However, this was all an act. In reality, Rael worked for an insurance company that preyed on middle and lower-income families, and he even attempted to recruit his own family and friends into the scam. Their lavish spending eventually led to bankruptcy, forcing them to sell off some of their assets to pay their debts. Despite this, the couple continued to project an image of happiness and success, even considering a move to a bigger city to further their fraudulent activities. Kiana was well aware of Rael's infidelity and was tired of being silent and forgiving. Eventually, they decided to divorce, with Rael falsely accusing Kiana of infidelity to justify the split. Devastated, Kiana knew that their family and friends were oblivious to the couple's problems, as Rael had carefully concealed the truth to protect his reputation. On October 20th, just 10 days after Rael filed for divorce, Kiana appeared on live TV, looking uncharacteristically somber. Her usual bright smile had given way to an expression of concern and sadness. After divorcing his first wife, Rael Burns had remarried Kiana, a successful and wealthy woman. He had reinvented himself as a devout guru, presenting a changed and reliable image. But beneath the facade, he remained the same, exploiting Kiana's trust and wealth by pretending to be a successful businessman. On November 9, 2021, 44-year-old Kiana Burns ended her tumultuous marriage by fatally shooting her husband, 46-year-old Rael Burns, before taking her own life. The couple, who left behind 8 children, had no reported history of domestic violence at their Atlanta home, according to the Sandy Springs Police Department. Just a few weeks prior to the tragedy, Kiana had reached out to her Facebook friends, asking for their prayers. The motivations behind her devastating decision remain unclear, but it's evident that the strong-willed woman was struggling with inner turmoil. It's difficult to comprehend the actions of someone grappling with depression and other mental health issues. The aftermath of this tragedy is equally heartbreaking, as 8 young lives are now left to navigate the world without parental guidance. The news of the couple's passing has sent shockwaves through their extensive network of friends and acquaintances. Rael Burns was the type of person who felt compelled to show off his success and luxury, often a trait of the deeply insecure. He became so enamored with his own self-confidence that he mistakenly equated it with self-importance. His tumultuous behavior ended up ruining the lives of multiple diligent and successful women. Individuals like him have no self-respect and no dignity. They are essentially ordinary swindlers who bring their partners down. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Frank Spencer. Frank Spencer was born on November 10, 1965, in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, to Cyrus and Malene Spencer. As a young boy, his passion for active games and sports helped him develop a strong physique and spirit. In high school, his exceptional skills earned him recognition as a standout member of the wrestling team. With a curious mind and a dream to carry on the family legacy, Frank enrolled in a local university after graduating from high school in 1984. He completed his studies in 1988 and, following his father's passing, took over the family business, becoming the owner of Spencer's Auto Parts and Used Cars. A pivotal moment in the young man's life took place in 1997, when fate introduced him to Maria. They instantly felt a strong connection. Maria was known for her fiery personality, bold nature, and intense emotions, which captivated those around her. According to Frank's friend Paul Siciliano, Frank had always been drawn to free-spirited individuals, and Maria was no exception. When the couple met, they had an instant spark and enjoyed each other's company. However, not everyone was thrilled about their relationship, particularly their parents. It was rumored that Maria's father, Anthony Rocco Franklin, had ties to a gang and was even known as a hired hitman. He took an immediate disliking to Frank and tried to prevent their union for some time. The Spencer family also disapproved of Frank's choice of partner, so the couple decided to elope and rent an apartment away from their families. This allowed them to maintain contact with their friends while keeping their families at a distance. As time passed, their families had no choice but to accept their relationship. Maria and Frank eventually got married and started a family, first having a boy and then a girl. The family later moved into a new home. Frank was a hard worker, owning an auto parts business and sponsoring racing cars. His top priority and motivation in life became providing everything necessary for his family, especially his children. Maria initially took on the responsibilities of managing the household and caring for the children. However, she eventually shifted her focus to coaching her daughter's soccer team, despite having a law degree. Friends observed that, unlike her husband, Maria seemed less invested in their marriage. She appeared distracted and somewhat detached from reality. Her lack of enthusiasm for domestic duties and responsibilities was evident. What truly concerned her, however, was the family's finances. While she freely spent the money Frank earned, her indifference towards the children was even more notable. Maria's behavior in her marriage became increasingly problematic over time. Her selfish and eccentric ways led to her husband's growing discontent. He believed that as a mother, she should have become more mature and considerate of others, but Maria showed no signs of changing. By 2006, her husband had had enough and filed for divorce, exhausted by her constant scandals and inappropriate behavior. He was also worried about the negative impact her behavior was having on their children's well-being, and eventually, divorce seemed like the only way out. After deciding to separate, the relationship between the former spouses became increasingly strained. A confrontation ensued. Spencer was adamant that he should have full custody of the children, as he distrusted his ex-wife and believed she was incapable of providing proper care. However, not everyone in Spencer's circle agreed with his stance. For instance, his friend Ron argued that for the sake of the children's normal development, both parents needed to be involved. He strongly advised Spencer to negotiate with Maria and share custody equally. Despite this, Spencer was convinced he knew what was best and continued to demand sole custody. In response, Maria also demanded sole custody and was counting on receiving substantial child support payments. The conflict escalated over time. Due to his ex-wife Maria's erratic behavior, Frank had to call the police on multiple occasions. Maria would not only attack him, but also their children. Not everyone believed Frank's claims, however. That was until an incident in 2008 that validated his story. Maria got into a physical fight with her former mother-in-law near their child's school. The situation unfolded when Maria showed up to pick up their daughter, despite Frank's mother trying to intervene. It turned out that Frank's mother was justified in stopping Maria, as they had a prior arrangement that day, but Maria changed her plans at the last minute. Following the altercation, Maria took their child and drove away without buckling her up. The police pulled her over and deemed her actions a threat to the child's life and health. As a result, Maria faced legal repercussions, including charges of disorderly conduct. Frank also accused Maria of stalking him, alleging that she repeatedly followed him. Maria was subsequently charged with this additional crime. Ultimately, the prosecution failed to prove the threat to the child's life, and Maria agreed to plead guilty to disorderly conduct and stalking in exchange for the dropped charges. Maria ultimately admitted her guilt and was fined $600. Yet this did not deter her from continuing her disruptive behavior. In fact, she became even more bitter and resentful following the incident. Frank's friends and family members began to hear more frequent complaints from him as Maria's threats and stalking intensified. Some of Maria's colleagues even revealed that she had openly expressed her hatred for Frank and threatened to take his life. This prompted one of her coworkers to jokingly refer to her as the Black Widow. Despite Maria's aggressive behavior, Frank attempted to remain calm and composed. He made multiple attempts to reason with his former partner, but she refused to back down. As a precaution, Frank started documenting all their conflicts, not to provoke legal action against Maria, but to protect himself in case something went wrong. His sole desire was to live and work in peace. But Maria's behavior had clearly crossed the line. By 2009, Frank and Maria's divorce had dragged on for years, with the children remaining in Maria's care. Despite his struggles, Frank eventually found solace in a new relationship with Julie Dent. However, it wasn't long before Maria discovered Frank's new romance. Although she claimed not to be bothered by Frank's relationship with Julie, in reality, she was deeply upset that Julie was forming bonds with her children. Frank, on the other hand, believed that Maria's intense jealousy was the root of all their troubles. This realization only fueled Maria's anger, culminating in a threatening voicemail to Julie in February 2009, warning her to stay away from her kids. The situation took a turn for the worse when the main character's father-in-law, Rocco, was released from prison after serving a 5-year sentence for fraud. Having spent time behind bars only seemed to worsen Rocco's notorious reputation, and Frank knew from past experiences that this spelled trouble. Many people believed that Maria had inherited her father's troublesome nature. This development made Frank's circle notice that he had become increasingly pensive and worried, and with good reason. The first incident following Rocco's release was a break-in at Frank's office, where important documents related to the divorce proceedings were stolen. The next day, Maria contacted her ex-husband and hinted that she had found a trash bag containing some interesting items on her porch. Frank understood what she was getting at and advised her to return the stolen goods. He also reported the incident to the police, but unfortunately, they were unable to find any evidence linking anyone to the crime. While the investigation was unable to prove anyone's involvement, it was clear to everyone that Maria and her father had a motive. The ex-wife was also considered a suspect, but in the end, the case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. Meanwhile, thanks to the authorities' efforts, Maria returned the stolen documents to their rightful owner. It seemed that the documents didn't contain anything substantial that could be used in court anyway. The failure to gather evidence was seen by Frank's adversaries as a green light to act with impunity. The situation grew more intense. Afterwards, the ex-partner began making threats on social media. She remained unhappy that the kids were in touch with Julie. In contrast, the new partner remained calm and composed. She took pleasure in spending time with her partner and his children. She avoided getting involved in the complex relationships between her ex-husband and his former spouses. But she was furious that Maria's desire for revenge had led her to neglect her parental responsibilities. The disputes dragged on until 2010, when Frank finally lost patience. He could no longer tolerate the situation and turned to the authorities for help. He asked the police to evaluate his ex-wife's behavior and provided them with their correspondence, which included implicit threats. However, Maria insisted that this was simply her communication style and that she didn't mean to threaten anyone. Once again, it was impossible to prove her guilt, as her warnings were too vague to be taken as concrete threats. Frank's tormentor got away with it again. In January 2010, disaster struck Frank once more. He and his partner had planned a romantic getaway to the Caribbean, but the night before they were due to leave, a fire broke out at his mother's house. Although no one was injured, the property was completely destroyed by the flames and smoke. Witnesses reported that a car driven by Maria, accompanied by neighbors and acquaintances, pulled up outside the house. The woman behind the wheel was seen smiling as she watched the scene before driving off. Tragically, after the fire had been extinguished, a dog belonging to one of Frank's children was found dead in the ashes. Frank was forced to call the police again, but despite their suspicions, no one believed the fire was anything other than an accident. It was clear, however, that Maria would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Yet, with no evidence of deliberate arson surviving the blaze, the fire was ruled an accident. After sending a message to Frank, in which she subtly gloated about how karma had caught up with him, the frenzied woman started sending similar messages to Julie too. As the police failed to take action, Maria became increasingly audacious, eventually feeling bold enough to make public threats against her ex and his new partner. A few months later, a fire broke out at Julie's house, where she was home at the time. Fortunately, she escaped by jumping off the porch roof and was unharmed, although her home was left uninhabitable. In response, Frank invited Julie to move in with him, which the young couple feared would only enrage his ex further, but they had no other choice. At the same time, an investigation into the cause of the fire was underway. The similarity in the method used suggested that it was the same person or people responsible. Although the woman's home was located in a different county, the couple hoped for an unbiased investigation by the police. Unfortunately, the lack of evidence meant they were unable to assist, and the fire could have been dismissed as a freak accident. However, Julie was resolute and appealed to higher authorities, which unexpectedly moved the investigation forward. The search of the suspect's backyard yielded flares, including a damaged one lying in the grass. Another flare, similar to the one that had caused the fire, was also discovered. Furthermore, experts found that the steps on the home's terrace had been soaked with a flammable mixture. After thorough inspections and expert analysis, arson was officially declared as the cause of the fire. Despite this, the lack of direct evidence once again meant that the perpetrators escaped punishment. Summer 2012 was unseasonably cold. In June of that year, Frank and Julie faked a breakup as part of a clever plan to throw Maria off guard. This was followed by the real final demise of the Spencer marriage. But the hoped-for peace didn't materialize. Just weeks later, on July 3rd, Frank was tragically found dead. Joe, a close friend, decided to visit him because he hadn't heard from Frank in a while, which didn't come as a shock to anyone. Frank had recently gone through a divorce and was seeking solitude. However, there was an urgent matter to attend to. For years, the friends had been teammates in a recreational karting league with their kids, and they were in the middle of a crucial series that they were determined to win. But unexpected setbacks could jeopardize their chances of success. Since Frank wasn't responding to phone calls, Joe decided to visit him in person. When Joe arrived at the cottage, he grew anxious. The front door was slightly open, and there were suspicious stains near the threshold. His worst fears were confirmed as soon as he stepped inside the house. He found his friend Frank lying lifeless on the floor. Despite the gruesome scene, Frank's face looked peaceful, as if he had finally found the tranquility he had been searching for. As Joe walked around the body, he noticed dried blood in Frank's ear. Without delay, Joe called emergency services as an accidental witness to the scene. When news of the shocking incident spread throughout the district, the culprit behind the horrific crime was instantly suspected. However, it was up to the detectives to gather concrete evidence and piece together the puzzle on their own. Upon arriving at the scene, forensic experts discovered a gruesome sight, with large pools of blood and several long drag marks. Furthermore, they found a clear shoe print on the floor and blood-stained gloves in the kitchen. These crucial pieces of physical evidence were sent to the lab for further analysis. A further investigation revealed that the bloody shoe print found at the scene matched the size of the shoes worn by Rocco, who is Maria's father. Additionally, skin cells from Frank's ex-wife were discovered inside the gloves that were examined. Notably, the ex-wife had not lived with the deceased for over a year, which means it was highly unlikely that the gloves containing her fresh DNA were left at the house by accident. Overall, all the evidence gathered suggested that both Rocco and Frank's ex-wife were involved in the crime. Soon, the suspects were detained. Autopsy and ballistics analysis determined that Frank Spencer had been shot with two different types of weapons. The first bullet was fired from a .30 caliber sniper rifle as he stood by the front door. Forensic experts found a sniper's nest approximately 115 feet from the house. The bullet passed through his hand and penetrated his chest, striking a vital artery. The shot was fatal. However, the attackers did not stop there. They dragged the poor man inside, where a final taunting shot was fired into his head with a .357 Magnum revolver. By that time, the man was already deceased. Therefore, the final shot was seen as an act of revenge. It was clear that the shooter harbored hatred toward his victim. Consequently, police speculated that Rocco fired from the rifle, while Maria finished what was started. Additionally, it was discovered that alongside the crime, Frank's car and dog were missing from the house, exposing Rocco and Maria. By reviewing traffic cameras, Spencer's car was spotted on a federal highway moving away from the victim's house shortly after the crime. Unfortunately, it was not possible to identify the driver. Eventually, the vehicle was found in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, 27 miles from Frank's home and 5 miles from Maria's residence. However, no fingerprints or other evidence were discovered inside the car. Regarding the victim's dog, it was found 2 days after the incident, having wandered into a wedding in Dauphin. Attendees immediately realized that the well-groomed animal had an owner thanks to a microchip. The dog was returned to Spencer's mother. It turned out that Frank had gotten a new pet for his children after the fire. This fortunate discovery helped clarify some aspects and effectively exposed the crime. According to the investigation, the criminals took the dog when they fled the scene. On their way home, Rocco stopped, and during this time, attracted by nearby food smells, the dog managed to escape. Subsequently, it ended up at a house where a wedding ceremony was taking place. This allowed detectives to prove that Rocco's phone pinged near the celebration site on the day of the crime, while his residence in Harrisburg was 12 miles away, contradicting his assertion that he was at home. Likely, it was Maria's idea to take the dog to the children, but this decision proved to be a mistake. During questioning, Rue admitted that his son-in-law had repeatedly asked him for help and had visited him the day before his death, which explains the traces found at the crime scene. However, Rocco could not explain the presence of a blood pool, and his statement sounded insincere. No one could confirm whether the men got along well or otherwise. Rocco also confessed that Frank had given him the vehicle to use that same day, apparently to justify his fingerprints in the victim's home. By doing so, he essentially admitted to being at the crime scene the day before. Searches were organized at the homes of Rocco and his daughter to find the crime weapons, but the seasoned criminal knew how to dispose of firearms, so neither the rifle nor the revolver was found. Ultimately, it would not have been difficult for him to dispose of the crime weapon. Maria also refused to admit her guilt. She insisted that the glove ended up in her ex's house by accident, possibly moved by the children on one of the days. In the end, the suspects were released home. However, detectives did not close the case and continued to gather necessary evidence. Meanwhile, Frank's friend Derek Reed managed to talk to the former friend during a school football match. During their conversation, Maria confessed that the last thing her husband saw before his death was her face. Her statement sounded odd. The investigation received heightened attention from the state's attorney general, who was extremely upset with the authorities' indifference to Frank's reports and statements. Moreover, the police received numerous complaints about their incompetence. An internal investigation was unavoidable. Unfortunately, it was not possible to prove the officers' negligent attitude towards their duty. According to the police, much information provided by Spencer lacked solid evidence, and the only person who could confirm or refute the officer's words was deceased. The public and the victims' relatives were extremely outraged that their petitions yielded no results. Meanwhile, investigators tried to prove the suspect's guilt, not only in the crime, but also in stalking and other offenses committed earlier. In 2013, a major interrogation was organized. At the same time, Maria and Rocco continued to claim their innocence, denying all 12 charges against them. Their unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation led to accusations of providing false testimony. Prosecutors believed that the suspects arrived at Spencer's house together and chose not to use their own transport to avoid drawing attention. Thus, they fled the scene in the victim's car. In late 2014, Maria was arrested again. By this time, Rocco had managed to flee after the last interrogation. He boarded a plane and flew to Colombia. The investigation interpreted the man's behavior as flight and proof of guilt. For 11 months, the criminal was elusive. Eventually, he was apprehended in Buenos Aires, Argentina, after being arrested by local police and fighting extradition to the U.S. However, the criminal's efforts were in vain, and he was sent back to his home country. Justice prevailed in the fall of 2015. Maria's trial took place, and she continued to deny her guilt, shifting the blame to her father. The accused claimed she loved Frank and never wished for his demise. However, numerous witnesses exposed her true character, recounting long-term threats, stalking, and arson. The trial lasted just over a week, and in the end, the jury delivered their verdict, finding her guilty on all counts, including deprivation of life, arson, burglary, providing false statements, conspiracy, and making threats. Maria was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 50 years. Eyewitnesses claim that Maria smiled constantly during the trial. "I didn't end his life, so I tried to stay optimistic," she explained in a later interview. A few years later, trials began for Rocco. He was extremely displeased with his daughter's accusations. The defendant insisted he was merely helping her, but was against violence. It was Maria who insisted on the crime. However, physical evidence suggested otherwise. Finally, in the fall of 2018, Anthony Franklin was found guilty of deprivation of life, as well as robbery and arson. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 45 years. Upon sentencing, the 77-year-old man blew a kiss to the prosecutor and the lead detective before cursing the judge. Years later, Rocco sought a retrial, claiming his defense attorney had been ineffective, which led to his conviction. Maria also attempted to appeal her case. However, both father and daughter's efforts were fruitless. Every divorce has negative consequences, but for some people, it leads to severe financial problems and emotional distress, resulting in changes to their social status and lifestyle. However, with time, things usually stabilize. Frank Spencer's situation was an exception, as his breakup ultimately proved fatal. It's worth noting that the relationship he was in was extremely toxic. By staying with his partner, Frank was in effect nurturing a dangerous enemy and putting his own life at risk. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jessica Patel. The case began with an emergency call from the husband Mitesh at 8:24 p.m. on May 14, 2018. The Cleveland police in the UK received the call from 37-year-old Mitesh Patel. In the call, he spoke about a burglary at their home and his wife being attacked. Mitesh described that upon returning home after shopping and picking up a computer at the office, he discovered their house had been ransacked, and his wife Jessica was unconscious on the floor, tied up with duct tape all over her body. Mitesh panicked, asking whether he should remove the duct tape and take his wife out of the house, but the police advised him to leave everything as it was. His voice was very shaky, and he was almost unable to remain calm. The call continued as Mitesh requested the police to send help, and they promised to arrive shortly. After the call ended, the police quickly appeared along with an ambulance. However, despite their efforts, they were too late. Jessica had stopped breathing and had passed away. Jessica was born in 1983 in a beautiful city in the western part of England. She was the eldest of 6 children in a traditional and well-educated Indian family. Both of her parents were successful and respected members of society. From a young age, Jessica was a well-behaved and cheerful child, the pride of her family. Though gentle and somewhat shy, Jessica was very determined and ambitious. She had dreams and always strived to turn those dreams into reality. She recognized her career path early on, aspiring to become a pharmacist and own her own pharmacy. Therefore, throughout her growth, she always tried to study and work hard. Jessica was a dreamer, like many other young women. From childhood, she had shown a love for romantic things. often watching Hollywood romantic movies and dreaming of finding her true love. In the early 2000s, Jessica pursued a degree in pharmacy at De Montfort University before continuing her studies at the University of Manchester. At De Montfort, she reunited with Mitesh, an old school friend from secondary school, with whom she had briefly been close before they went their separate ways. Their reunion as adults seemed like fate. They shared many similarities in personality and family background. Mitesh, a calm and reserved man, also studied pharmacy and came from a large Hindu family much like Jessica's. They often spent hours talking on the phone without getting bored, showing care and always listening to each other. Jessica's room was filled with stuffed animals gifted by Mitesh, symbols of the warmth and affection he had for her. As mentioned earlier, Jessica was a dreamer, and therefore, receiving such gentle and warm treatment from a man made it easy for her to immerse herself in it and be swept away. Not long after getting to know Mitesh, Jessica's mother fell seriously ill and later passed away. It was one of the most challenging times in Jessica's life. During this difficult period, Mitesh stood by her, encouraging Jessica and providing a strong shoulder for her to lean on. After this event, Jessica realized that Mitesh was the man she wanted to marry. In July 2009, Mitesh and Jessica held a grand wedding with hundreds of guests attending to bless the young couple. The ceremony took place in a picturesque garden, marking the first time in their Hindu community that a wedding had attracted such a large number of guests, approximately 600. This momentous event was a testament to the deep love and unbreakable bond between Jessica and Mitesh. After marrying, Mitesh convinced Jessica to move to Middlesbrough, a city more than an hour's drive away from Leeds, where her entire family lived. Though initially hesitant about moving so far from her loved ones, Jessica eventually agreed to follow her husband. Both Jessica and Mitesh were born into well-off families, and shortly after their marriage, they bought a large house in one of the most affluent and beautiful areas in Linthorpe. Their ambition did not stop there, as the young couple also purchased a pharmacy on Roman Road, a bustling area in the region. The business flourished, leading them to hire more staff and upgrade both the shop and their home. Not long thereafter, nearly everyone in the area knew of the pharmacist couple for their friendliness and likability. Jessica and Mitesh's life was almost picture-perfect at this point. The only thing missing from their complete family was a child. Having grown up in a large family, Jessica always dreamed of becoming a mother. However, achieving this was not easy for them. After many years of trying, they still could not experience the joy of parenthood. Like many other couples facing fertility challenges, they resorted to in vitro fertilization, IVF, to conceive. Unfortunately, Jessica and Mitesh were plagued by misfortune throughout their journey to have a child. After 3 different IVF attempts and numerous consultations, the results were still unsuccessful. The cycle of hope and disappointment had a significant impact on their mood, and both were deeply saddened and distressed, but they never gave up. Their relentless persistence eventually brought a glimmer of hope to the young couple in 2018 on their 4th attempt. The doctor announced that they had successfully fertilized 3 embryos, and the chances of success were very high. Joy overwhelmed Jessica, and she immediately called her sister, sharing her happiness and intuition about the promising outcome. Jessica's long-held dream of becoming a mother was about to become a reality. However, unexpectedly, just a few weeks later, her beautiful dream was shattered by an unforeseen tragedy. May 14, 2018 began like any other day for Jessica. She went to work at the pharmacy while her father visited Mitesh, who only worked half a day. Mitesh left the pharmacy in the early afternoon to go to the gym, and around 7 p.m., Jessica returned home. Mitesh then stopped by the pharmacy to pick up a computer and bought a pizza to take home. Upon his arrival, Mitesh encountered a horrifying scene. He discovered a disturbing situation and immediately contacted the police. It was approximately 8:20 p.m. when Mitesh reported to the police that his wife was lifeless with no pulse. He stated that he had left the house about an hour earlier and found her unconscious. He had removed tape from her neck, legs, and arms, emphasizing that there was no response from her when questioned about the bruises. Mitesh noticed bruises on her neck and blood on the floor, and he attempted to wake her up in distress, but his efforts were unsuccessful. On the other end, the police informed him that an ambulance was on its way. Eventually, when the medical team entered the house, they found Jessica in the living room. They did everything they could to save her, but it was too late. On the morning of August 15th, the residents of Linthorpe were shocked to learn that the local pharmacist had been murdered in her own home. This tragic news immediately caused widespread unrest and anxiety within the community, leaving people around the area bewildered and frightened. It seemed that a bold thief was rampaging through the peaceful residential area, and every resident felt vulnerable, fearing they could be the next victim. The shock from this event prompted the community to take swift action, rushing to buy additional locks and install security systems to protect their homes. Just the day before, their neighborhood had been peaceful, but now everything had changed. Immediately after receiving the call, the police promptly arrived to secure the crime scene. The first 60 minutes following a murder are crucial for collecting clues and evidence, and therefore, the police immediately proceeded to cordon off the area. Minal, one of Jessica's sisters, awoke to find her husband motionless at the foot of the bed in the dead of night. Instantly, she sensed something was amiss. This disturbing news quickly reached Jessica's family, who rushed to Jessica and Mitesh's residence. Upon entering the living room, Minal found Mitesh slumped on the sofa, head in hands. She sat beside him, offering solace, and Mitesh, overcome with emotion, buried his face in her shoulder, surrendering to uncontrollable sobs. Minal reassured him that no matter the circumstances, the family would stand by him unwaveringly. The room was heavy with sorrow, and the sound of weeping spread, piercing the hearts of all present. After the police asked Mitesh and Jessica's family to leave the house, they began a thorough examination of the crime scene. The first thing they noticed was that there were no signs of forced entry or vandalism from the outside, suggesting that Jessica might have known her attacker, although Mitesh insisted that she was trusting and could have opened the door to anyone. Meanwhile, the police needed to verify the alibis of all the people involved, and the first person on their list was Mitesh, who had the closest relationship with Jessica. The police needed clear details about Mitesh's actions that day, not just to confirm his alibi, but also to establish the timeline of the intruder's entry into the house. Determining exactly when Mitesh left the house was crucial, allowing the police to check the surveillance footage from the security cameras in the area during the time of the crime. Mitesh admitted that he had left the house around 7 p.m. to buy pizza and then drove home, where he discovered Jessica unconscious in the living room next to the window, with her legs and arms tied with tape. The house was in a state of disarray, with items scattered everywhere. Mitesh stated that he was away from home for just over half an hour, so Jessica must have been murdered between 7:45 and 8:20 p.m. Previous examination results showed that Jessica died from asphyxiation, and the bruises on her neck indicated that the attacker had used a type of cord to strangle her on May 17, 2018. Just 3 days after Jessica's death, the family received a call from the police informing them that a suspect had been arrested the previous afternoon. According to the police, a 37-year-old man suspected of being involved in Jessica's murder had been detained. The next day, when the family went to the police station to confirm the identity of the suspect, they were shocked and disbelieving. It was Mitesh Patel, Jessica's husband, whom they had trusted and loved. Learning the truth left Jessica's family and the local community in a state of disbelief and shock. Initially, people thought there might have been a mistake in the police investigation. However, the police affirmed they had sufficient evidence to suspect Mitesh. This raised many questions, challenging the notion of how a husband like Mitesh, who seemingly loved his wife dearly, could commit such a heinous act. During the investigation, the police searched the house and found a hidden hard drive from the security camera system. It was concealed among the clothes and placed under the mattress in the bedroom. This security camera system had never been mentioned to the police by Mitesh before. The security camera data revealed that Mitesh had returned home at 3 p.m. and did not leave. Jessica left the house at 7 p.m. and returned at 8:15 p.m., but there was no evidence of anyone else entering or leaving the house. Exactly 6 minutes before Mitesh called the police, the security camera was disconnected. The police noticed scratch marks on Mitesh's neck, but he claimed they were from an accident at the gym. However, forensic examination revealed Jessica's DNA under Mitesh's fingernails, suggesting that she had struggled and resisted when he assaulted her. At the pharmacy, the police found the roll of tape used to bind Jessica. When comparing the torn piece of tape to the remaining roll, they matched perfectly. A suitcase full of clothes was also found under the bed, and during a search of the medicine cabinet, they discovered jewelry worth approximately 25,000 pounds in a gold bar stored in a safe. With this evidence, Mitesh became the prime suspect. The police decided to investigate Mitesh's motive by checking his mobile phone and personal computer. In the search history on Mitesh's computer, they uncovered a horrifying truth. Since 2013, or precisely about 5 years before Jessica was murdered, Mitesh had been searching the web for keywords like "how to kill wife," "insulin overdose," and even viewed a video on the time needed to make someone stop breathing entirely. Notably, shortly after searching for these terms, he purchased a life insurance policy worth £2 million on Jessica. The police found irrefutable evidence when examining the iPhones of both Mitesh and Jessica. Mitesh seemed confident in his intelligence, but he was unaware that iPhones have a health app that records the user's heart rate and activity. This app tracks every movement up and down stairs, as well as heart rate, and all this data is accurately recorded according to specific timestamps. The health app on Mitesh's phone showed that after returning home with the pizza, Mitesh did not immediately call the police. Instead, he went upstairs for about 4 minutes, which led the police to believe that this could have been the time he attempted to hide the hard drive of the security camera system. The health app also showed that Mitesh was running around the house at approximately 7:04 p.m., implying that he was scattering items to create a fake crime scene of a burglary. He then moved Jessica's phone and placed it near the entrance to suggest that an intruder had dropped it while fleeing. Mitesh had thoroughly planned to kill his wife, hiding their troubled marriage from the world. The trial exposed the shocking reality behind their seemingly perfect relationship, catching Jessica's family off guard. Mitesh confessed to the entire process of committing the crime and the full story behind the case. On May 14, 2018, Mitesh returned home after his earlier gym session, while Jessica came home around 7 p.m., unaware that Mitesh had been waiting for her. As Jessica entered the house, death awaited her. Mitesh acted quickly, using a plastic bag to cover Jessica's head, attempting to suffocate her. Though Jessica struggled and fought for her life, the plastic bag tore, but Mitesh did not stop there. He injected a large dose of insulin into Jessica's body, causing her to lose strength and the ability to resist. Coldly, like a monster, Mitesh strangled Jessica until she could no longer breathe. Immediately after, the truth behind the seemingly happy family image of Jessica and Mitesh was exposed. The wedding photos from July 2009 capture a moment of happiness and radiance, with the bride Jessica shining in her beautiful sari, young and joyful beside her new husband. When Jessica and Mitesh began dating in college, he seemed to be the ideal boyfriend, always showering her with romantic gifts and tender love. They appeared to be the perfect couple when Mitesh proposed in 2009, even though the family thought it was too soon. Jessica managed to convince them of their love and decision, despite her family's strict adherence to Hinduism, as they did not want to wait. Divya depicted Jess as graceful, witty, and feminine. As children, they connected over Bollywood love stories, igniting Jess's aspirations for romance and family. Their extravagant garden wedding in Leeds, where Jess was raised, signaled the beginning of their new chapter. Mitesh led a secret life, engaging with men on Grindr, while his marriage to Jessica was a facade to hide his true sexual orientation from his family and community. Jessica was unaware of the deception, believing she had found a loving husband. The days that followed were filled with suffering and grief. Within a year, cracks in Jessica and Mitesh's relationship became evident. Jessica confided in her sisters that she felt Mitesh's behavior had gradually changed after their wedding. A significant shock came to the family when she revealed that they had not been sexually intimate for 10 months, a short time after their marriage. Concurrently, Mitesh became increasingly controlling in their relationship. When Jessica's grandfather fell seriously ill and was moved to a special care room, the family spent time at his bedside. Jessica, his beloved granddaughter, could only make brief visits. Jessica told her sister that Mitesh would not let her stay, and they had argued in the car about it, and he had hit her. Jessica also revealed to her sisters that Mitesh occasionally choked her and often kept inexplicable secrets. Her sister further said that if Mitesh was on the phone when Jessica walked into the room, he would leave and continue the conversation in one of the attic rooms, sometimes not returning until 4 a.m. Despite the mistreatment she endured, Jessica was a forgiving and gentle woman, and she harbored no resentment towards her husband and did not want to abandon their marriage. Perhaps her love for him had become something greater, allowing her to endure all the unfair treatment that Mitesh inflicted on her. However, ultimately, Jessica's heart was completely shattered when she discovered the devastating truth that Mitesh had never loved her. Mitesh, a gay Hindu man, used Jessica as a front to conceal his sexuality and uphold his family's honor. He used dating apps, brought lovers home, and disregarded Jessica's feelings in the process. Mitesh had numerous same-sex partners but loved only one. After 2 years, he began an intense affair with Dr. Amit Patel, whom he met on Grindr, and even brought his lover home, introducing him as a friend to Jessica, the oblivious wife unaware of her husband's infidelity. Mitesh recently purchased a pharmaceutical business in Middlesbrough and planned to relocate the family, much to his wife's dismay. Despite this, he maintained active involvement on gay dating apps. The pressure to have kids was a constant burden for the couple. After 6 years, Jessica agreed to IVF, unaware that Mitesh planned to have a family with his lover using her embryos. Jessica's family was devastated to learn Mitesh never wanted children with Jessica and secretly took birth control to prevent natural conception during the 2-year IVF process. Jessica went through tough times, and after each setback, she'd tell her sister, "I can't do this anymore. It hurts too much." Her mental health suffered, but she persevered. The 4th round of IVF was successful, and in May 2018, they learned 3 embryos were ready for implantation. Days later, Jessica was overjoyed to become a mother, but tragically, she passed away the next day. In 2016, Amit immigrated to Australia, and Mitesh began dreaming of a new life with his lover in a new country. He even texted his lover, "I told you her day had been marked," indicating that he saw his wife as an obstacle and was ready to remove her. Mitesh had harbored dreams of a family with his lover and planned to bring embryos to Australia, where they would care for their children together. The police also discovered that Mitesh was researching housing prices in the Australian city where he and his lover lived. Mitesh's sinister plan, after eliminating Jessica, was to use the life insurance payout he had taken out on his wife to have the financial means and freedom to start the life he truly anticipated. Prosecutors also stated that Mitesh's motive was always to escape the strict upbringing of his Hindu family and move to Australia to be with his lover and start a new family. Mitesh was also set to inherit a life insurance policy worth £2 million. The culmination of all of Mitesh's cruel actions and plans was a life sentence with no parole for at least 30 years. The jury took 2 hours and 50 minutes to convict Mitesh at the trial. Mitesh displayed no emotion when Judge James Goss told him, "You are a selfish, business-obsessed individual who wanted a successful life and wished to retire at 40. You also wanted to commit to living with another man according to your own desires, and you knew that the insurance policy would grant you £2 million following Jessica's death." Judge James Goss also stated that the minimum term of 30 years is reserved for cases where the severity of the criminal act is particularly grave. He added, "This is such a case. Only Mitesh can truly answer why he did this. Everything he did was for selfish reasons. He could have divorced Jessica and taken everything he wanted without needing to take her life. He had no right to commit this wicked, cruel, and vile act. The suffering of the victim's family seems to follow them for the rest of their lives, especially as they have lost Jessica forever. Hopefully, the story of Jessica will inspire other victims of domestic violence to seek help instead of suffering in silence. Jessica will never be forgotten, and we also wish to send prayers for her to rest in peace." Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alicia Canales McGuire. On September 20th, 2017, around 1:55 a.m., a series of events unfolded in Everett, Washington. Multiple people dialed 911 after being startled by loud bangs. 10 minutes after the initial calls, police officers arrived at the scene, where they were met with a horrific sight. 24-year-old Alicia Canales McGuire lay dead on the doorstep, just outside the door. Investigators cracked this heartbreaking case thanks to social media and CCTV footage. Born on October 29, 1992 in Mount Vernon, Washington, Alicia was the daughter of Manuel and Michelle Canales. Throughout her adult life, she worked as a caregiver, driven by her passion for helping others. Raised on a farm, Alicia started working at the age of 5, which instilled in her the value of hard work. She often returned to the family farm to lend a hand. Alicia cherished family time, regularly visiting and speaking with her loved ones, never failing to express her love when bidding them farewell. Alicia lived in Birdsview with her husband Bradley. The couple got married in a beautiful beach ceremony at Deception Pass in July 2017. However, the investigators soon discovered that Alicia didn't reside in the house where she died. Instead, it was her sister Amanda Canales' home, where Amanda lived with her 3 kids. Amanda had a work commitment in New York and asked Alicia to take care of her children during her absence. Alicia, who adored her nephew and nieces, was more than happy to help out. There was a staying nanny in the house with her, and she was one of those who called 911. She woke up to the sound of gunshots, and when she went downstairs, she saw that Alicia was lying at the front door and not moving. The police officers who arrived at the scene took immediate action, beginning with a thorough examination of the house to rule out the possibility that the perpetrator was still inside. They conducted a meticulous search, confirming that only the nanny and Amanda's children were present in the house. Once the frightened children had been safely removed from the house, the police commenced their investigation for evidence. A car parked in front of the house caught their attention, with shell casings discovered nearby, indicating that the shooter had been standing beside the vehicle, just before the front door. Several bullets had hit the door frame, and Alicia's lifeless body was found lying face down, right outside the door. It didn't resemble a robbery. The house was tidy, and it seemed as though the perpetrator hadn't even stepped inside. But who would want Alicia dead, and what could be the motive behind it? When the detectives found out that it was her sister's house, they began to suspect that it was a case of mistaken identity. Perhaps Amanda was the target, but she was in New York when the crime occurred. The nanny, a witness who was present in the house at the time of the crime, provided a calm and coherent account to the investigators. During questioning, she explained that she was upstairs when she heard the sound of gunshots. Upon looking down, she saw Alicia lying face down on the floor, motionless. However, she did not see the perpetrator of the shooting. Startled, the nanny immediately called 911. The nanny gave the police the first crucial lead. She reported that Amanda, Alicia's sister, had problems with her ex-husband, Kevin Lewis. The detectives pored over the reports from the local sheriff's office and discovered that this was not the first time someone had called the police to that address. Every prior incident involved domestic disputes between Amanda and Kevin Lewis, which caught the detectives' attention. They obtained Kevin Lewis's home address, situated in a different part of Everett, and paid him a visit before dawn to conduct an interview. Although his house was shrouded in darkness, Kevin responded to their knock on the door. During the conversation, the officers asked Kevin if he knew where his ex-wife was, and he replied that she should be at home. He looked like he had just woken up. The detectives asked him to tell them where he had spent the night, and he said he had been at home all night, with his sister and mother able to confirm this. He didn't ask what was the reason for the detectives' visit. When the detectives told Kevin about the shooting at his children's residence, he remained impassive, which raised suspicions. A typical parent would have asked about their children's well-being, but Kevin didn't. The detectives then informed Kevin that Amanda was out of town on business, to which he reacted with apparent surprise, saying, "Really?" Next, the detectives investigated neighboring houses and discovered that 2 of them had surveillance cameras that could corroborate or contradict Kevin's alibi. The footage revealed that Kevin's claim of staying home all night was false. A car was seen pulling up to his driveway approximately 40 minutes before the attack on Alicia. The footage showed someone resembling Kevin leaving the house, entering the car, and driving away. Although the recording quality was poor, the police couldn't positively identify the individual. A closer review of footage from another camera provided additional details about the car. While they couldn't identify the vehicle's make, they noticed that the front right rim was a different color from the other 3 light-colored rims. The car returned to Kevin's neighborhood about 20 minutes before the 911 calls reporting the shooting started. The person who had entered the car earlier returned to the house and went back inside. Amanda learned about her sister Alicia's death a few hours later, while she was in New York. When the investigators asked Amanda if she thought her ex-husband Kevin could have been the one who shot Alicia, she replied that she had no doubt it was him. Even though their 8-year marriage had ended, Amanda was still not ready to fully acknowledge how toxic the relationship with her ex-husband had been. Amanda was deeply unhappy throughout their marriage. Even after their divorce in June 2017, Kevin's threats continued to intimidate her. He had physically abused her in the past, and despite their separation, he remained a threat. After the divorce, Amanda was awarded full custody of their 3 children, and Kevin was ordered to pay $800 monthly in child support. However, he repeatedly violated the restraining order, showing up outside her home and terrifying both Amanda and their children. Despite these violations, the police never charged Kevin with any crime. Amanda suffered a severe beating in her driveway just a few weeks before her sister's death. One night, she arrived home late and parked her car next to her house. As she opened the door, someone attacked her. The assault happened so quickly that she didn't get a glimpse of the attacker's face. Nevertheless, she was certain who was responsible: Kevin Lewis, 30, who would later become the prime suspect in the murder of Alicia Canales McGuire, Amanda's sister. The investigators believed that he intended to take the life of his ex-wife. Kevin did not know that she was in New York during that time, and he didn't know that Amanda had asked Alicia to look after her children while she was away. However, there was an inconsistency in this theory. If the man in the footage was really Kevin, it meant he was at his house at the time of the shooting. In addition, his sister and mother provided him with an alibi. The police continued their investigation, exploring various explanations for what had occurred. They revisited Amanda's house to re-examine the scene, including the path the bullets took. According to experts, Alicia was shot when the door was ajar, and the shooter fired at least 7 times, with the shots coming from outside the house and entering it. The evidence gathered at the scene suggested that the shooter stood next to the garage, firing initially, before moving towards the door and firing again from inside it. The medical examiner identified the cause of Alicia's death as multiple gunshot wounds to the head and torso. She got struck by 5 shots, and 2 of the wounds showed gunpowder stippling injury. The medical examiner testified that he could not determine the sequence of the 5 shots, but said that the last 2 gunshot wounds to the head were probably the last 2 wounds inflicted. According to the experts, the 7 shell casings found at the crime scene were fired from the same firearm, and the bullet wounds to Alicia's head were inflicted at close range. The investigators analyzed this theory, but didn't find any evidence confirming this. The shell casings found at the crime scene also attracted the attention of the police because this brand of casings was not very common. They were Russian-made casings manufactured under the Tulamo brand. Since it was not a very common brand, the investigators hoped they would identify the seller of these cartridges and maybe even the buyer. The investigators found that Walmart had sold .40 caliber cartridges of a specific brand, with one of the stores located near the crime scene. Walmart representatives informed the detectives that a man had recently bought 9mm Tulamo cartridges, and they had CCTV footage of the transaction. The detectives promptly visited Walmart to review the footage, which was recorded on September 18th, 2 days prior to Alicia's death. They initially suspected that Kevin Lewis might be the buyer, but they were mistaken. The man in the footage was not Kevin, and he had paid using a credit card. The investigators looked into this individual and discovered no connection to Kevin Lewis, Amanda, or the nanny, forcing them to search for new evidence. After thoroughly examining all the existing theories, the investigators approached Amanda to gather new information about Kevin. Initially, Amanda stated that their relationship was okay during the honeymoon phase, but Kevin's behavior gradually became more aggressive, culminating in physical abuse. Their tumultuous relationship ultimately ended in divorce, with a restraining order issued against Kevin and Amanda gaining full custody of their children. Despite her emotional distress, Amanda firmly believed that Alicia's death was a case of mistaken identity, convinced that the intended target was actually herself. She suspected that Lewis had orchestrated the attack, but the police found that Kevin had a solid alibi, as he was at home during the time of the shooting. The investigators have again reviewed the footage taken on the night of Alicia's death. Now they noticed something they hadn't noticed before. This low-quality recording shows Kevin, or the man who left his house, walking up to the car and getting into the back seat behind the driver. But why didn't he get into the front passenger seat? In search of an answer, the investigators concluded that someone else was already sitting in the front passenger seat. Therefore, by the time the car pulled up to Kevin Lewis's house, there were probably already 2 people in it, and perhaps that's why he had to sit in the back seat. The police had no evidence to link Kevin to Alicia's death. However, they gathered evidence of Kevin's attacks on his ex-wife Amanda and arrested him in November 2018. The court sentenced him to 3 years in prison. More than a year had passed since Alicia's death, but the case remained unsolved. Then, in 2019, a breakthrough finally occurred when a woman contacted the police station with crucial information. She provided a tip that a girl who lived in nearby Spokane had been overheard bragging at a party about being hired to kill someone on York Road, the same road where Alicia was fatally shot. Although the police were initially skeptical, given that Spokane is about 5 hours away from Everett, they decided to investigate further. The woman who called said she was at a party where she met a young woman who introduced herself as Angelica. The latter bragged about how she and her boyfriend participated in the crime. According to this woman, Angelica said someone died because of a shot in the head, and they were shooting from around the corner and were hired by the children's father. Moreover, Angelica said they took the wrong person's life. It was a case of mistaken identity. The police never publicly disclosed the details of this case, but investigators and family members were aware that Alicia had been fatally shot in the head. Since Angelica possessed knowledge of the crime's specifics, the police became intrigued by her information. During their search for Angelica, investigators discovered that her real name was Alexis Hale. On her social media, they found photos of her posing with a 9mm pistol, which may have been the murder weapon. Additionally, there were several videos showing a man in the background, later identified as Alexis's boyfriend, Jadon Phelps. On the night of Alicia's death, Alexis Hale posted a video filmed through the windshield of a car, analyzing the road signs. The investigators determined the exact location of this car at that moment. It was about a 10-minute drive from Kevin Lewis's house. In the following video taken a few hours after Alicia's death, Jadon Phelps bragged about a wad of money. The investigators saw 5 comments under Phelps's photo on social media, and one of the comments was from his aunt, whom they recognized as Kevin Lewis's mother. It turned out that Jadon Phelps was Kevin's cousin. The police had sufficient evidence to make arrests. The first person they detained was Alexis Hale, who was 17 years old. As the officers handcuffed her, she protested, claiming they had no right to arrest her due to her age, yet she seemed aware of the reasons behind her arrest. She promptly requested a lawyer. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, the police took Jadon Phelps into custody. The investigators used Phelps and Hale's phone records to show that they had driven from Spokane to Everett to carry out the shooting. Security footage from Lewis's neighbors showed someone getting into a car in the early hours of September 20th. The man in a white top left at 11:13 a.m. and returned at 1:37 a.m. When the police went to see Lewis after Alicia's death, he was wearing a white top. Alexis remained silent with the investigators. At the time, Kevin Lewis, now known as Kevin, was serving a 3-year prison sentence for assaulting Amanda. The investigators turned to Phelps, the one who had arranged the crime, hoping to gather information. As they suspected, Phelps confessed and revealed the name of the man who had hired him, Kevin Lewis. The police took Phelps to the crime scene where he provided further details of the crime. Phelps initially just showed them where the house was, and they were taking him back to his home. Later, when they went back, Phelps showed them the area where he was standing, and he described how Alicia opened the door slightly, and as Lexi was walking towards them, Phelps started shooting at the door. Alicia closed the door, and Phelps opened it and fired a few more shots. Kevin Lewis, who was already in jail on an unrelated charge, was arrested on charges of aggravated murder with a firearm, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder for the September 2017 death of Alicia Canales McGuire. In July 2020, Phelps, who was then 20, pleaded guilty to premeditated first-degree murder, and the court sentenced him to 31 years in prison. Hale, who was then 18, pleaded guilty to the same charge and got 15 years. Phelps testified at the trial that he had committed the crime for money and the street cred. He claimed he had spent the money Lewis paid him to get some tattoos, a pair of Timberland boots, and a Ferragamo belt buckle. He also claimed his former girlfriend had got the pistol from a family member. Lewis pleaded not guilty and faced a trial later that year. The prosecution said that he had paid $2,400 to his cousin and his girlfriend to get his ex-wife out of the way, turning them into teenage assassins. But in a tragic case of mistaken identity, it had been Alicia who had opened the door. Phelps said Lewis had directed them to the home, but claimed he didn't know who the target was, just the address. On the way back, Lewis handed Phelps an envelope of money after dropping Lewis back at his residence. Phelps and Hale returned to the location Lewis had pointed out, and Phelps fired the gun until it was empty, starting from his position near the garage, and fired the last couple after walking up to the front porch. The muzzle of the gun crossed the threshold. The last couple of shots were around the neck and head area. Phelps and Hale left in their car, but then returned because they believed they might have left a glove at the scene. When they returned, they saw police cars, so they turned around and left. They accessed GPS directions and drove back to Spokane. The defense argued that Lewis had never actually used the word kill when talking to his cousin and had simply said to get the target out of the way. But the prosecution reminded the court of Kevin's history of violence and the threats he'd made against Amanda. In November 2021, Lewis was found guilty of first-degree murder by a jury following a 6-week trial that lasted less than 3.5 hours. In January 2022, at the age of 34, Kevin was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. As part of the sentence, Judge Thompson prohibited Lewis from having any contact with his ex-wife, children, Phelps, and Hale for the remainder of his life. According to records, Lewis is currently serving his sentence at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla County.